the second day, we'll go ahead and start with roll call. No? We'll dispense a roll call on this second day. Closer to my mic. Second request. All right. So we will start first thing with our 8:05 agenda item, making sure we're moving through it as quickly as we identified here with workers' compensation and unemployment insurance. I see we'll have LSO come forward here, Ms. Ravel. And I see we have the Director of the Department of Workforce Services, Robin Session-Cooley, with us and her team. Welcome. We'll start the morning off with LSO. Everyone can come forward to the table.
Good morning, members of the committee, Madam Chairwoman. The first draft that should be in front of you is 24 LSO 0198. It is working draft 0.4. I'm Tamara Revely with the Legislative Service Office, and I'll walk you through the bill and explain some background on it. So this bill was requested at your July meeting as part of your consideration of the workers' compensation program. And you heard at the July meeting that the department currently only considers the investment income on the loss reserves or the discounted liabilities. There's this amount that's held, the provision for adverse deviation that's held as a contingency, and the investment income on that is not currently considered. If it were to be considered, you were provided with a memo, I believe, that estimated the amounts, the effects that would have had, and it would have lowered rates fairly significantly. So that's in your meeting materials. This bill draft would specifically allow the department to consider a portion of investment income on that amount that's held as the PFAD. So whenever you're ready, I can walk through the bill. Okay. On page 1, this is a fairly narrow bill. It relates to workers' compensation. It authorizes consideration of the specified investment earnings for determining rates under the workers' compensation program. And then it conforms terminology related to that term, the actuarially reasonable provision for adverse deviation. The meat of the bill is on page 2. The conforming of the bill begins on page 2 and leading on to page 3. So page 2 goes into the workers' compensation statute and just clarifies that that the account that's held shall include an actuarially reasonable provision for adverse deviation. It was previously termed the contingency margin, and this just gets statutes to use the same terminology in the 3 places that it's used. Similarly, in the definition on the bottom of page 2, the definition of fully reserves includes that actuarially reasonable provision for adverse deviation. It was called appropriate contingencies previously without this change. Then on page 3 is the part of the bill that allows for consideration, specifically allows for consideration and directs consideration of investment in earnings. It states that the investment earnings from the investment of the amount that's held as the actuarially reasonable provision for adverse deviation shall be considered revenue to the workers' compensation account as provided in this paragraph. Now, the annual amount of investment earnings available for consideration as revenue under this paragraph would be determined by the department in an amount equal to not less than 0% and not more than 5% of the total market value of that PFAD. There's no direction on selecting rates within that range. The range, as the staff comment notes, was actually from 0.5 to 4.5 within the materials that were provided to the committee in July. And working with the department, 0 to 5% was selected. And so that's what's used in this bill draft. The other note on the staff comment just points out that as the language is drafted, the PFAD is just referred to as the total market value. It's not specific in this bill draft whether it's the total market value on the first day of the fiscal year. So that could be something you might want to specify. It's also not specific if you wanted to do a rolling average of the previous 5 years, for example, or some other kind of smoothing than just the total market value on one point in time. Finally, the bill draft's effective July 1st, 2024.
Thank you, Ms. Reveley. Any questions for Ms. Reveley? Senator Grew? You're good. Representative Larson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess my question then might be to Jason. When we refer to this market value, as I read it, I assumed it would be for the commitments of the fund. So the total market value as we have it, which is committed. She brings up this market value as, do we need to further define that, or?
We'll go to Department of Workforce Services here in just a minute. Any final questions for LSO? Just explaining the bill draft, and then we'll hear more substantive comment from the agency. All right, with that, we'll go to Department of Workforce Services. Director Cooley, welcome. I know we have questions been referred to Mr. Wolf, but we'll go ahead and allow you to introduce yourself and your team to the committee.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Robin Cooley, and I'm the Department of Workforce Services Director. It's a pleasure to be here today, this morning. And thank you for looking at this statute. I think it provides a lot of opportunities in the area of workforce services and workers' compensation. But I wanted to start the discussion on workers' compensation out this morning by letting you know that we've had a couple of press releases go out now, and we're happy to report that workers' compensation premiums will come down in this next year, 6.5%. An incredible amount. It's not happened in several years, and I think that's really going to be a benefit to our businesses across the state. But I think what you'll see with this particular proposal, with investment in allowing us to invest the PFAD, could assist to further reduce those costs, because that investment would then return additional money to the fund, which would increase the ability to reduce those funds or those premiums even further. With that, I'm going to introduce to my right, Mr. Jason Wolf, administrator in our office and over workforce service or workers' compensation. And we've also got online Mr. Troy Meadows, who is our actuary with Oliver Wyman. And I will turn it over to them.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Larson, I think the language as stated in the bill works for us. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Larson, I think if I understand your question correctly, as the statute lays out currently written here, would work for us. I don't see a need to define that any further.
Questions of the agency, Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going to continue that question though. Market value, the question is, as of when? Is it market value as of the first of the calendar year, first of the fiscal year? Is it market value as of the day that it's sent out to the particular company? I think that's the question. We understand what market value is, but it's the question of market value as of what point in time is really the question we're trying to evaluate. And so would it be better to be the market value based on the previous 5 years? Is it the market value, like I said, calendar year, fiscal year, first of each month? That's what we're trying to determine, so that because it's the market, you're holding it against the market value at a point in time. So that's how we need to know what that point in time is, so you can know how much to hold, I guess, the question. And so that's what Representative Larson and I are trying to establish, is what is that point in time or points in time we would like it to reflect against.
Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, we evaluate the fund on a fiscal year, so ending June 30 of every year. So I think if we have a need to put that in the statute, I would do it on a fiscal year market value at June 30 of the end. Correct.
No, Mr. Wolf, I heard you just say that if we felt the need to put it in statute, do you think that's prudent to put it in statute or no?
Madam Chairman, I'm just kind of thinking through it and I don't think it makes a difference to us. But I think if you're more comfortable having that defined in statute, I would say put it in for a fiscal year.
Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I understand this has to do with the calculation and determination of an adverse situation. My question goes to the process that probably is already in place and maybe doesn't need to be addressed related to this, but it's the process of who do you notify and how is notice provided and how much time before it's executed is provided for. In other words, I mean, just have your meeting, have your determination and implement. I wouldn't assume, right? I mean, how do you provide notice to the people who are affected by this?
Madam Chairman, Representative Henderson, great question. So there is an annual process that we go through to determine these rates. We kind of begin this process in March of every year. And then by the end of the fiscal year, June 30, all the information, payment data, all the claims information is passed off to our contracted actuary. They then begin analyzing the losses for the prior year. And then in September-ish, usually every year, we have a rate indication is provided to the agency where we select what the base rates for each industry will be for the following year. And then we notify every employer, some 16,000 employers in the state, of that in November, that this will be their rate come January of the following year here.
Further questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, any final
Another
comments from Senator Kinsky?
Tamara, I want to make sure I'm on 194 working draft .4. Is that what we're looking at?
All right, any final comments from Department of Workforce Services?
So I do have a question.
Madam Chair, I would just note too that we do submit an annual report each year on both workers' compensation and unemployment, and providing you with information on the outcomes, the trends in for this particular change. If it is implemented, it would be something we would include in that report and have continual conversations with you about it.
Okay. Question on 198, Senator Kinsky?
Yes, I just want to make sure, and again, this would be for Tamara. I believe in an email exchange, if referring to the letter from Meadows and Scott of August 3, page 4, the last two paragraphs, they talk about to avoid volatility, utilizing a constant rate of return assumption and leaving the determination of the rate up to the division. And I believe the bill has been drafted with that language, that concern addressed. Is that correct, Tamara?
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
Yes, the bill gives complete flexibility to the department to select a rate from 0 to 5%. And so they have that flexibility. It doesn't direct them to account for volatility or provide them any other guidance on how to do that. It simply gives them flexibility and discretion.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, with that, we're going to go to public comment. Any public comment on this bill? Any public comment online? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Committee, back to you. What's your pleasure?
Second.
Bill's been moved and seconded. Discussion on the bill.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Would like to make an amendment on page 3, line 10. And then I'll let LSO refine this to conform with other places in statute, but it would say market value based on the previous 5 years. And using our other LSO language to accomplish that task.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Representative Walters, there's discussion now on the motion. Do you want to explain to the committee and the public why you're
Thank you.
proposing that amendment?
Thank you. I just think we need to note the point in time in which we're evaluating that market value. And the reason for using the 5-year rolling average is it smooths out a high year and a low year. So we really get a better sense of what that market value is. If we use a 1 year or the preceding year, there's a good chance it could be a low year or a high year. And so it doesn't give us a real accurate reflection. That 5-year rolling average seems to work well on other places of our funds. And so we use that quite common. That's the purpose for it. And
Further
it's to pick
discussion on
that
the
point
motion?
in time.
Senator Kinsky.
So the department has any view one way or another on the 5-year rolling average? I want to make sure that we're not going, there's not some unintended consequence that.
I'm hearing head nods, seeing head nods. Mr. Wolf.
Madam Chairman, Senator Kinsky, I don't see any issues with that, but we do have Troy Meadows online, and I would kind of ask for him to chime in if he sees any issues with using a 5-year rolling average of the PFAT amount. So I would turn it over to Troy maybe.
Mr. Meadows, do you understand the motion and the question in front of you?
Madam Chairwoman, yes, I do.
Or if you could introduce yourself to the committee and answer the question.
Sure. The name is Troy Meadows. I'm an actuary with Oliver Wyman Actuarial Consulting. I've been performing actuarial services for the division for the last 6 or so years. And in response to the question, I do think it's prudent to look at a longer time horizon. Actually, when we were putting together the numbers that I believe were shared with the committee, we were looking at it. I think we looked at a 3-year history, and we actually selected the minimum PFAD level over that time frame for conservatism. I think using a 5-year rolling average is a perfectly reasonable way to look at things. I think you could also use a minimum PFAD level over the last 5 years to, if the desire is to get to, a number that's a little bit more conservative. But a 5-year rolling average is certainly reasonable.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. That motion has passed. Further amendments on the bill? Question being called. Roll call.
Members of the committee, the motion is on 24 LSO 0198, working draft 0.4 as amended. Pursuant to your rules, a motion on bills requires a majority of both houses. Representative Henderson. Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Sherwood.
Aye.
Representative Stith.
Aye.
Representative Walters.
Aye.
Representative Juan Dave.
Aye.
Senator Anderson. Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Kinsky. Senator Salazar. Co-chairman Nicholas. Chairman Nethercott. Madam Chairman, motion is adopted. House bill or Senate file?
All right, thank you, committee. Let's move on to 2024 LSO 194. Representative Larson. The co-chairman and I will determine that later. Thank you. We're moving on to 2024 LSO 194. Ms. Reveille, this is State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund Investments.
Members of the committee, we are on working draft 0.4. And can everyone hear me? So for reference, this bill draft relates to the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. We were just talking about workers' compensation. Now we're talking about unemployment. And within unemployment, at your last meeting, you, as part of your interim topics, we're looking at the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund for the state and the Federal Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. You received information about the state's fund, which has been about $51 million, and received information that the funds were not currently being used to fund the program. The earnings on the fund, however, are used to fund the Workforce Development Training Program. You heard at your last meeting that the earnings on the fund, the rate of return had been from about 1.16 to 2.6%. It's invested in the state agency pool. So at that time, the committee requested LSO draft a bill to invest the state's unemployment insurance trust fund in the Pool A investment account, which can be invested in equities and has had a historical higher rate of return than the state agency pool. So this is your bill draft to do that, and I'll walk through now. On page 1, the bill draft generally relates to public funds, and it provides for the investment of the state unemployment insurance trust fund as specified. The bill draft then goes into existing statute 94715P and creates a new paragraph. This new paragraph is on page 2. It is under subsection P, which is the creation of the Pool A investment account. This adds to the list of the 15 other funds that can be invested in the Pool A investment account. It adds the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund that's created by Wyoming Statute 273209A. That is the entirety of the bill as drafted, other than the effective date on page 3. The remainder are staff comments, and I'll just point those out to you. Note that this bill mandates that the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund shall be invested. If the committee had meant to allow that to be permissive, that would need to be changed. Otherwise, this is a directive. Then also under the Wyoming Constitution, Article 16, Section 6A2B, the bill requires passage by a 2/3 vote of all the members of each house voting separately. This is because it is establishing the amount of non-permanent funds that may be invested in stocks or equities. And then finally, existing statute authorizes the director of the Department of Workforce Services to determine when and in what amounts withdrawals from the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund are necessary. And that language is copied below. It's 273209B. It basically says the director may determine when and in what amounts withdrawals would be necessary. And then that would be immediately done if that were needed to pay benefits. And so in the event, even though this account hasn't been used to pay benefits in the recent past, in the event that a withdrawal was necessary, the statute directs it be made right away, immediately. And you could see how that might cause problems if the liquidity of the Pool A account didn't allow for that. So that staff comment just points that out. And finally, the bill draft is effective the standard date, July 1st, 2024.
All right, questions for Ms. Revelick? Representative Stiff, I see a furrowed brow.
Madam Chairman, Ms. Rivoli, with respect to the liquidity requirements and matching and the current ability of the director just to withdraw amounts as the director sees fit, any recommendations on how you guard against a mismatch between the liquidity requirements and how it's invested? Does staff have any proposed solution to that?
Ms. Revelick.
Madam Chairman, Representative Stiff. Yes, here in the staff comment, I've actually suggested that if you wanted to consider addressing that, you could require notice for withdrawal in a manner that's consistent with liquidity requirements rather than trying to specify some amount of time that would be needed, just general policy that notice for withdrawal would be needed.
Further questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, we'll go to the department. Director Cooley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I have with me Holly McCamey-Simone. She's the administrator of our workforce programs, which one of those programs is UI, and Chris Funk, our deputy administrator over unemployment insurance, to help me out with this. But a few additional funds just to begin with here. Our agency receives, or let me just talk to this Fund 528. This is an exciting bill for us, an exciting proposal for us because it allows us to really ramp up an effort that has been successful around the state with our training fund programs, which include not only training existing employees, but also internships, apprenticeships. It's been doing some remarkable work around the state to really provide that skills-based training for our employees. So it's a very exciting plan for us. And we're all on board with it. When we did talk, I would just mention when we did speak with the treasurer's office, the liquidity issue did come up, and it was my understanding there were no concerns with that. We could obtain funding from that fairly quickly if it was needed. One point that I want to make, however, is as we were, this is a fund that just hasn't been used for a considerable amount of time. And it's sat there, it's been invested in a very safe investment pool. And we've never had a chance to look at it, but as we're looking at the language and how we would actually access these funds, we're not sure that the process that's in the statute works. We don't think that if we take money from this, say if we have a government shutdown, for instance, or just a total stop on government with so the Treasury, for instance, federal Treasury could only do certain submit certain monies out. This may not be one of them if we were sending the money to the Treasury to pay it out for UI benefits. And so we are investigating how that process would work, if it would work. So we may need to come back to you with some additional ideas on how to make that process work. And we would ask maybe that this be an interim project for this next year. But putting that aside, the proposal is good. It provides us some additional help with those training funds, and we are 100% on board with this. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. McCamey Simone for additional information.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Director, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I was going to briefly touch on the memo that we provided and how it relates to this legislative draft. We do agree with the proposed legislation regarding the investment of the UI State Trust Fund, and increasing those investments, as Director Cooley mentioned, will help with our additional training dollars, particularly those internships, apprenticeships, and workforce development training initiatives. Also, along with that, we did attach the Wyoming Treasurer's Office information regarding the asset allocations and its impact on the fund. They agreed that investing in Pool A made sense, as the state UI trust fund was still sufficiently liquid to meet the intent of the statute. And then, as noted earlier, lastly, on comments on page 3, Director Cooley also mentioned that the process, we're still talking with Department of Labor on how that process looks, and we may need to come back with additional amendments to the committee on the process specifically.
Any questions? And I'm processing that we're not going to move this bill forward. All right, seeing no questions for the agency, we'll go to public comment. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Tammy Johnson. Excuse me, I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming State AFL-CIO, and we work in the area of workers' benefits and such, as you know. I just was concerned when I saw this bill that whether the actuary or anyone had looked into the impact this may have on future UI benefits. If there were a shutdown or something like that happened, that so now we're going to switch this to a different fund, which may be more accessible, but also if it's earning higher yields, my guess is it's more volatile or more risky. And so do we put the fund at a greater risk by switching it over when it's been in a very conservative, generally yielding consistent revenue for the fund? And then my other question was escaping me at the moment. If you're not going to move this bill forward, I guess I think you might have said that right as I was standing up, but then perhaps we could look into that a little bit more. But I don't know what the impact will be on benefits for UI. So that's my concern.
Thank you for sharing those concerns. Committee, questions for Ms. Johnson? All right, seeing none, Ms. Johnson, thank you for your comments. Further public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Committee, back to you.
Madam Chair,
Senator Kinski.
Ms. Cooley, you threw me a little bit. I was ready to support the bill, so.
Who's everyone thrown this morning? Representative Stith?
Madam Chairman, for Director Cooley, So if I understand it right, we're talking about, this is just about $57 million that we're talking about that's in the fund right now. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Representative Stith, it's about 51 million and it stays right about that amount. But this is the separate state UI trust fund, not the federal fund, which is number one again in the country in terms of health and solvency. So that's why we think now is the time to really look at some different options and some innovations with this fund, because we really are in a good place with the actual fund that pays out benefits right now.
And
Thank you.
follow up, Madam Chairman. So how are the state unemployment trust fund, how is the money invested right now? Does it just sit in a checking account? Where, because obviously the proposal is to put into pool A, which I support. I think that makes a lot of sense. I just want to make sure I understand what the status quo is and where we're going to.
Madam Chair, Representative Stith, it's my understanding it's in pool B, which is a less risky fund. So we are getting investment income off it.
Okay. Madam Chairman, final question here. To address the issue of a potential mismatch between the liquidity needs of the interest that comes off, the income that comes off the fund for your workforce training program and the investment objectives of pool A, can you address again how we avoid having a mismatch? That is, theoretically, if pool A were invested in some really long-term investment, but you wanted to take the money out more, for immediate needs for workforce training, how would you, as a practical matter, how would you address that?
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Stith, the money coming off the investment fund routinely is sent over to us so we have it in a pool to use immediately. I think your question is, again, to the liquidity. If we needed to get to it, how quickly could we get to, if we're paying down funds in the federal UI trust fund at a rate that, well, it would have had to have been at a rate that was much quicker than we were paying out through the pandemic, for instance. And that was a pretty significant rate. We would be recognizing far before we would need to actually tap into that $51 million. We would recognize the need for it and would begin taking steps to get that. So I don't, the 24, 48 hours liquidity need there, I don't see as an issue, simply because we're going to know beforehand and we're going to start efforts to be tapping into that long before that liquidity timeline would be a concern. Does that answer your question?
Madam Chairman, I believe it does. I think the common goal here is to make sure that, for example, if you buy a 30-year bond at 2% a few years ago, the face value of that bond is a whole lot lower now. Like it may have lost 10 or 15% of its value. So you don't want to get pushed into the situation of selling a long-term bond when it's at an unfavorable rate, just because interest rates have gone up from, say, 2% to 5%, right? But it sounds like the way you intend to administer the program, that won't be an issue. So I think what you're saying.
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Stith, yes, that's exactly correct. Thank you.
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kind of following that line of reasoning, would you like the ability to not have to invest the entirety of the fund in pool A? Or is the entirety in there okay with you? And I ask that because we have other funds in pool A that we've just modified the language to where you could do up to 50% or up to 75% or an amount as based on the discretion of the agency of that account could be put into pool A. Do you need that kind of flexibility for liquidity and other purposes, or throwing the whole amount in there okay with you? And because you can see what's coming on the horizon, you can pull it out and don't have concern.
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Walters, I believe that Representative Larson asked that question at the last meeting as well. And so that was a question we raised with the Treasurer's Office. My understanding from their response was we didn't have that option. It was an all or nothing perspective. Now, if it is an option, I'll be frank with you. I'm comfortable putting it all in pool A. because we do have the ability, if we need it, we're going to know it and we're going to be able to access it fairly quickly. And I just don't think it's going to be an issue. So I would rather do the all or nothing.
Further follow-up,
Madam Chair.
Senator Kinsky?
So this bill has let me make sure I'm not following, because in the materials, what I get out of it is that this bill would enable a lot more money to go to employer support and training at a time when we need trained workforce.
Everyone move closer to your mics. I'm hearing comments. That's me included.
So tell me what the concern is that's the showstopper that would lead you to say maybe we just push it to an interim topic as opposed to trying to get it right now.
The question was, what makes this bill a showstopper? If you could go over that again, please, Director.
Yeah. Madam Chair, Senator Kinsky, on page 3 of the bill at 273209B, there's language there at the bottom. It talks about how we would go about accessing, we would have to access the funds for payment of benefits and immediately forward those to the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States of America to the credit of the state's account in the Unemployment Trust Fund. So if we access those and we submitted them immediately to the Treasury, if there was a situation where the Treasury itself was in a position, it was in a shutdown, and we weren't able to access, or they were limited to what they could actually spend out and pay out for some reason, we're concerned that the purpose, the intent of this would be null if we couldn't access those funds at that time. If the federal treasury wasn't able to pay these out to us. And this came up recently, and I'm going to have to call on Chris Funk, our UI administrator. It came up, she's the one that kind of noticed it with a recent federal government event that happened, and it kind of put a light bulb over our head. Hey, this might not do what we want it to do. Chris, can I ask you to speak to that?
Deputy Funk?
Madam Chair and members of the committee. So where this came up was last time, I believe that we had informed you that our hope was that we've had 2 incidences in the last, 6 months. One was the debt ceiling, potential debt ceiling, right? And then the other is the government shutdown because of the balancing the budget. So it's our understanding, and this is where we need to have specific clarification from DOL and the U.S. Treasury Department as to when we can access funds. Because the purpose of this state trust fund, as far as we're concerned, because of the health of the federal trust fund, is that in the event, like Director Cooley said, if we cannot use the U.S. Treasury to disperse those funds for us to use for benefits, we need to be able to pay our workers in Wyoming, right, if they become unemployed. And so the way the bill reads now is that if the director approves the funds for benefit purposes, it automatically goes to the U.S. Treasury. Well, it's our understanding that unemployment is a necessity and it impacts the economy. So potentially in November, if there's a shutdown, unemployment continues, we can still do drawdowns because they will have staff at the U.S. Treasury. We haven't gotten a solid answer, and that's what we're pushing for is what's the U.S. Treasury going to do in the debt ceiling? Because that's not something that has happened a lot. I don't know if it's ever happened in the history of the U.S. that the debt ceiling has caused the government to completely shut down. And so we're trying to get a solid answer because that's what we want to make sure is this statute reads so that if we cannot access that healthy federal fund, we would have funds that we could use locally to pay our unemployment benefits. And that's what the statute is not clear about that. And it seems like it's pretty clear that we wouldn't have access if the U.S. Treasury is not open.
Deputy Funk, thank you. Senator Kinsky?
So let me make sure that I'm following. Staff points out on page 3 that 273209B currently has this language in it. So your concern remains a concern even if we kill this bill, right? So aren't you better off to move the bill forward and work on this language to get it clear, whether you're in pool A or any place else, that this money should not be immediately forwarded to the Secretary of Treasury, but it would be available locally as you just specified. I mean, aren't we better moving the bill forward and addressing two concerns, getting a higher return on your investment and addressing this language in 209B?
Director, Deputy, either one?
Madam Chair, Senator Kinsky, we're just so excited about the other option that we don't want to stop it. But yes, we need to first find out from federal treasury what happens in the debt ceiling. And from there, we may not need a change. So we're kind of doing it step by step. We want to find that out first, and maybe we don't need a change, but we're concerned enough about it. We're looking into it.
Follow up. And can you find that out before we gavel in February 10th?
Madam Chair, Senator Kinsky, absolutely.
Thank you.
Representative Larson.
So Director Cooley, I think we're talking about two different issues regarding the same fund. And if I understood you correctly, if you can help me here, is as we was coming into this bill, which this bill just says that we would be able to invest the state's unemployment fund differently than we currently do. Boom, that's all this bill does. But in a precursor to that conversation, you identified that as you researched our ability to use the funds in the state unemployment fund, if we ever needed them, has some problems. And that, as was pointed out, such as in the case of a debt ceiling. And so structurally, how we have it in our statutes or how we coordinate with state government in the event, regardless of how we have it invested, but being able to access those funds to satisfy the demands of our employees that may be needing unemployment, we may need to address structurally in statutes our ability. We need to correct some things, which is a different issue. And the sky's not falling on that. It's just something that we're going to have to do. And hence, you said maybe that's something we could consider as an interim topic, but it's just by random, you kind of discovered that, and we have a yellow light, not a red light, but a yellow light. We may need to fix that. Am I understanding that correctly?
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, you're spot on.
Okay.
Further questions from the committee? Give you all a minute. Co-chairman?
So at this point, it would make sense to take the current bill as drafted, modify it. So it's not may, it's not shall, it would be may. So you can then adjust it to the amounts that you want to put in, that you're comfortable with. And so we can amend this statute and revise it so it's a better fit on the language that's put in here. And then when you come back in December and or January, we can finalize the bill depending on what you find out. That to me is the most logical going forward on both issues.
That's the co-chairman finding solutions for the committee. Thank you, Mr. Co-chairman. Director, comments?
Madam Chair, Representative Nicholas.
Yeah, but this says shall 100%, and it should be up to.
Co-chairman, let's have the director answer the question.
Madam Chair, Co-Chair Nicholas, I think that is certainly an option. We could certainly do that. Yes, we should know by then.
And for the department to understand, so we'll have meetings, of course, in December, January, and a long time before February. So we have the ability to see this bill multiple times before we gavel in February, as Senator Kinsky indicated. So we'll just be mindful of that and not potentially table it to an interim, but rather continue to work it until you feel confident with its ability in February. I think the committee's confident for you. I have hesitation trusting your subject matter expertise more than ours. Senator Kinsky?
So I guess it's a note to staff. I just want to make sure the bill title is broad enough that if we do loop around and bring in this language about the Tamara's raised on the bottom of page 3 about benefits payable to the U.S. Treasury, that if we bring a fix back in for that, I want to make sure the bill title is broad enough to contemplate that.
Ms. Reveley?
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
Senator Kinsey, I do think with an amendment, should you want to bring in, and I apologize for any confusion the staff comment has caused. On page 3, lines 1 through 35 would be completely removed from this bill. They are not part of this bill. They're just staff discussions for your reference. And so if we were to bring this bill and broaden it to address the way that benefits or funds might be used from the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, I would probably make conforming changes to the title to broaden it out just a bit. So right now, if you move this bill forward today, the bill would just relate to the investment of the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. If we want to make a change to law, and this is existing law, it's probably been in place since 1997. If we want to make a change to existing law about the way that benefits are paid from that fund in the event they're needed in relation to the Department of Labor and the federal government, how they logistically handle those benefits, you'll need amendments. You'll need to bring in 27.3209 and make changes. And with that, yes, I would broaden the title just a bit to conform that. And so you could move this bill forward with a broader title and plan to bring an amendment during session if you wanted to address that at that time. Or you could simply move this bill forward as is, have it only addressed investment and consider a change next interim to the payment of benefits and the communications with the federal government.
Follow up.
Absolutely.
So, Ms. Cooley, so on page 3, again, back to Tamara's note in the staff comment, she raised it in the context of the first sentence of 209B, which requires that you give notice of your intended withdrawal so that Pool A knows whether they've got liquidity to address it or not. I haven't heard us talk about that one yet. What the concern that we're talking about is you looked at the second sentence and says, holy smokes, they're going to give that to the Treasury. We need to work on that one. But I think you still may want to do a little bit of background work on the first part, whether Pool A is going to need, whether you're going to have to ask permission to take it immediately out of Pool A, because they may or may not have sufficient liquidity. I suspect Pool A is big enough and whatever amounts you request are not going to be so huge that you'd have to ask for permission, withdraw, and potentially have them tell you, no, not for a while. Give me a couple months. We'll raise the money. But that one does require a little more background work.
Director?
Madam Chair, Senator Kinsey, I understand your concern and we'll look into that as well. In our discussions, I didn't get a sense that would be an issue, but you just never know. So I'll look into it.
Representative Sherwood?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In regards to the bigger picture of this goal, so we're wanting more resources to invest in our workforce and in training programs. And I'm happy to take this offline. I'm wondering if you have a goal for where you want the training fund to be at, and what that's going to look like in the next few years. And I know maybe that's in your annual report, but yeah, I just kind of like to look at is there a 5-year plan for the training fund, what you want that fund to sit at, or how much you want in it, and what that long range plan is. Thank you.
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Sherwood. When we first started going down this road with increasing the amounts available to businesses, we spent, it was around $4 to $5 million in the span of, and I don't want to say spent, we obligated $4 to $5 million in the span of 8 months, which was an incredible surprise to us. We didn't do much marketing and all, but it was the need that's out there with our businesses that we saw. I would love to get this fund. Right now, I think on average, we have about $2 million that we get in that fund. I would like to double that amount, if not triple that amount, because I think you will see that is the need out there. And I'm just going to make another plug for it, because I think, we want to keep people in the state. We want to provide them opportunities for pathways into the great job opportunities that are in Wyoming. These are immediate return on investment opportunities to do that. And I think if we can, if I would love to see a 5-year data pull on what we can, and we're collecting data on this, so we will be able to do that for you. I'd love to see the data on if we can maybe change some of those out migration numbers or change some of those numbers of in-migration, people coming back in, because again, some of these programs are pre-hire. So if we get a new business, we've got a business open, we can allow them to start building their workforce while they're constructing their business in Wyoming. So the sky's the limit with this, and it's just that important and that beneficial to the state, I think. And I just can't overstate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director. Any final comments or questions to the agency? All right,
Madam Chairman,
Representative
one more
Smith?
question. Director Cooley, when you're spending funds out of this account, as an operational matter, how much advance notice do you need? I mean, in other words, how far in advance do you know, oh, I'm going to need to write a check for $100,000? Do you know that a month in advance? Do you know that a week in advance? Or you walk in the office and say, oh my goodness, we have to pay a big bill today and write a check? The idea is I'm trying to figure out.
Come closer to your mic.
I'm trying to figure out if we should put some sort of advance notice requirement to the state treasurer in the bill, or just let you work that out operationally.
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Sith, you're talking about the money that might come out of the state fund in order to pay UI benefits? Or are you talking about the training fund dollars?
Madam Chairman, talking about the training fund dollars. In other words, if you had to give 30 days notice to the state treasurer before you could take money out, how difficult would that make your job?
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Sith, now with the investment dollars, we get them on a rolling amount. They go into a fund that we keep track of, that we use. So it's not we don't request the money from them and then pull it out. We just get that those investment funds just kind of come to us as they come in. So we're not actually even asking for those investment dollars from them. We just don't do that. It's just something that's automatically shifted over to into our account.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Based on the same question, I think then to the principle of it, how much advance time would you know you would need to draw on the principal amount, the 51 million? I think that's the question being asked. Are you going to see something coming down the line a week, a month, a year in advance that you will need to draw on that 51 million on the principal side of it, not on the investment income that's generated off of it, that I understand just rolls back to your account and you then spend it. But how readily available would you need the principal amount or a portion of?
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Walters, the principal amount can only be spent on UI benefits. So we're going to have at least a 6-month time frame where we know we're spending those federal dollars down. We're going to have, I would say, and Chris, please speak up. I think we are going to know if we're in a situation we're spending down that very healthy federal trust fund. We're going to know we're going to need it, and we're going to be able to get on the stick and get that done fairly within sufficient time to be able to utilize it.
We're just gonna do a long pause here and allow you to consider additional questions before we shut her down. Any final questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you. Committee, my understanding conceptually of how we're gonna work this bill is the co-chairman has an amendment he wants to propose, and then we'll see this bill again in December and look forward to hearing further information from the department regarding some of these logistical concerns that members of the committee have expressed, and of course, additional information about how Treasury would operate in the event there's a crisis. Co-chairman Nicholas?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So I would move to amend the draft bills that allows the investment of the unemployment funds up Pool A
One-
up to the maximum amount. So it's not the whole amount.
Sounds like that's a Second Amendment. Keep your thought. We'll go ahead and move the bill. Do I have
Second.
moved by Guru, seconded by Walters? Co-Chairman Nicholas has an amendment to change the potential a shall to a may. Is that correct? Co-Chairman?
Well,
Nicholas?
it's a little bit more complicated than it, yeah. So it's just up to the maximum amount. And it's the actual amount that you invest. You basically have a conversation with with Patrick over and you pick a number, whatever you want. It could be 80%, could be 20%, could be 95%, or it could be all of it.
So we're on a different topic. My apologies for, I think Co-Chairman Nicholas is doing a motion on the amendment based on, I think Representative Walters' suggestion of having flexibility to the department of how much of the funds are invested in Pool A and giving you discretion for that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so your motion is what, Co-Chairman Nicholas?
To modify the current draft to up to 100% of the funds be invested, rather than saying the entire fund shall be invested.
Is there a second? All right. I know Co-Chairman Nicholas is directing questions to the agency on the motion. I follow the rules of order in a committee meeting.
Actually, I'm directing my comments to Tamara
Okay, great.
to make sure that she understands it and what is necessary to.
There's a second on the motion. Tamara, do you understand the amendment?
Yes, Madam Chairman, and I'll read it back for the committee.
Thank you.
On page 2, line 21, after Romanet 16, it would say up to 100% as determined by the department. The State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund created by 27-3209. You have to read that in conjunction with the prior sentence that says monies in the following funds shall be invested in the Pool A investment account.
Further discussion on the motion. Representative Walters.
Madam Chair, I'm going to resist it. I don't think it's necessary. We heard testimony from the agency that they're comfortable with investing 100% of it right now, and also that they will have plenty of advance warning when they'll need to withdraw this amount to where they can bring it back out. So I just don't know that it's necessary to add this level of complexity.
Madam Chair, just a response to that, it may not be necessary, but why not give maximum flexibility with the language? It just makes more sense.
Further discussion? I think the issues are clear for the committee. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry. All those opposed?
No.
That motion has passed. Further discussion on the bill? Senator Guru?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a question or just a comment in Ms. Johnston's question about talking about, how this might affect, ongoing demand for the fund. I think it's just something that we should talk, just have something.
Closer
for
to
the
your
next-
mic.
Have something for the next meeting that we could talk about, just so we could address that issue, just make sure that we address it.
I couldn't hear what the senator said. Senator Guru, could you repeat that request?
I'm sorry.
Hanging out with you guys.
We'll try again. No, Ms. Johnson, in her testimony, just asked about a question about how we're using this fund and would it jeopardize the ability to pay out payments in its regular course of duties. Just wanted to make sure that we address that. I think I heard the answer to that question and I got it, but I just wanted to make sure that it was addressed.
Thank you, Senator. All right. We are moving this bill to our December meeting, so there won't be a vote on the bill at this time. Committee, we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break.
Madam Chairman,
Who's talking to me? Representative Zwanitzer.
are we still open to ask questions? Or you want to go to break first?
Representative Zwanitzer, go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, do you have a financial advisor on your staff? And if not, who would make the decision, should this bill go forward with the amendment, of how much you put in each pool?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Zwanitzer, we do not have a financial advisor. We've basically got Ms. Funk, who has been in the agency for 30 years in all areas of it, but we do not have a financial.
Thank you, Representative. All right, committee, we're going to give the department a break. We will see them again in December with these questions in mind. Committee, as you think about this issue and this bill, if you go ahead and, let the department know so they can answer your questions in December in a public meeting, that would be prudent. Recognizing that we're 30 minutes ahead of schedule and we're going to maintain that speed. We'll take a 5-minute break, allowing those that are planning to be on the agenda at 9:30 a heads up to come. We will take a break and come back at 9:06 a.m.
Madam Chair, if I just may.
All right, we are back from our brief morning break. We are back with the Department of Workforce Services, knowing that there was one additional item that we want to make sure to briefly discuss that you'll see on our December meeting with further discussion and likely a bill draft for your consideration. But just to kind of remind the committee of a concern that was mentioned by this committee to the department. And so we can really circle back on all those issues that we've discussed and solutions provided by the department. They're just going to give us a brief overview of the topic we'll be considering in December. So with that, Deputy Funk, if you could please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we wanted to just, if you refer to the PowerPoint that we sent last time, we were asked to maybe come up with a proposal of not necessarily, we can't reduce the federal trust fund. That can only be used for benefit purposes. So unfortunately, we can't give any of that money back to employers. Over, I think 40% of experience rated employers have a zero tax rate now. So many states have chosen to go the direction of changing how their tax rates are calculated. They've reduced their taxable wage bases. Many of those states, what has happened is their federal trust fund has suffered and they have Title 12 advances. They pay interest to the federal government, which actually goes to employers. So we really didn't feel that the right approach to have less funds go into the trust fund was the right approach was to change the way the tax base rate is calculated or how the factors are calculated. So because we can't give money back to employers, we felt that maybe distributing some of the funds and having a little bit less money going into the federal trust fund makes more sense. You can't go less than a zero tax rate anyway. So what we are proposing is that the tax rate calculations stay the same, that the taxable wage base stay the same. And this is something we're open to always reviewing, right? This is, I think the problem has been is that in the time that I've been, we've made zero changes or very few changes to how this is all calculated. But as we go through time, we do need to reevaluate and determine because the situation here in Wyoming has changed because unemployment has been so low. We have as far as USDOL considers it, we have the healthiest federal trust fund in the country right now. So DOL does not govern how much we have in the trust fund, but they recommend that you have enough funding to pay unemployment benefits for a year. We have anywhere between 2 and 2.5 years worth. So we have plenty of money to pay benefits for quite some time. So we don't really have concern about that. But what our proposal is that we take one of the factors that was created years ago. So there's the purpose of the way the rates work is to recoup the benefits paid out into the fund, right? So that there's always money available there. So what the proposal is years ago, there was a factor that was added to an employer's tax rate, which was called a non-charge ineffective charge. And that's situations where a claimant collects benefits, but the employer is not charged. An effective charge is like say in construction where their experience rate would be higher than the max that we can charge. We have to recoup those benefits still, right? So what that purpose is that where the money is not coming back in, the purpose of this factor was to recoup some of those funds. Because of the health of the trust fund, we felt that it was we could go ahead and change that calculation. Currently, the calculation is so we take the non-charge ineffective charge and we split, and currently 60% goes into the federal trust fund, 40 goes into ESF. And if you look at the current distribution employer UI payments, I think that's the second page. That shows all of the things that ESF funds are used for.
Chair, I'm trying to find what you're referring to.
Senator Kinski, yeah. So what I think is happening here is we're going through the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes.
So we're going to refrain from doing that right now.
No, I get it. I'm just
Okay.
trying to figure out which PowerPoint she's referring to.
It is part of your meeting materials.
Yeah. I've got PowerPoints that relate to the PFAD. I've got PowerPoints that relate to the UI investment. Now you're talking about the rate, the calculation of the rate, as opposed to the investment. Yeah.
So this is for the unemployment insurance fund. And so what we're going to do is we're going to review this topic in December. At that time, there will be a bill draft that the department will be working with LSO and members of this committee on preparing. We will review more thoughtfully this PowerPoint presentation at that time in conjunction with the bill draft. So it's more clear what it is we're intending to do, recognizing that we were just intending to kind of briefly touch on this topic here today as a reminder of some questions that were presented by the committee at our last meeting. But we will work this substantively and go through in detail, as Deputy Funk is excited to talk to us about in December. And so we're able to really work through the details of the proposed bill draft as applied to this PowerPoint in December.
So Madam Chair, I'm not trying to slow down the train. Mrs. Cooley, in your memo that accompanied the PowerPoint, you briefly touched on rates and then segued immediately into investment and increasing the employer training. I'd appreciate a memo that breaks out just this particular topic, because I failed to catch that it was kind of kludged together, and the employment thing and training thing caught my eye.
Madam Chair, Senator Kinsky, we will do that. I apologize. It did get kind of pushed together, and because this is such a complex issue, I think we will do a very thorough run through on what we want to do and how it might benefit businesses and workers.
Madam Chair, you don't need to apologize. I heard my two daughters overheard my two daughters once. And the one says, how can he not have read that? The other one says he doesn't read anything. He skims and scans. So it's not on you. It's probably on me.
Madam.
Yeah, I want to just keep this high level right now, knowing we're going to get to it in depth in December, but Representative Larson, we're unleashing the Krakens right now.
So as you get ready for this, if I'm understanding it correctly, we take what we're currently going in, the employer's paying, and we're going to reallocate it proportionally somehow. And so as you talk about that, help me understand if that's, as we do that, do we also have the option of, instead of doing this, reducing the amount of unemployment the employer is required to pay? I mean, could we give them a break on unemployment taxes versus doing this? So if you can just make that clear when you're talking about that, I'd appreciate it.
Representative Stith.
Madam Chairman, Director Cooley, if I understand the big picture here, what you're saying is that right now, none of the unemployment taxes are going directly toward the workforce training fund. What this would do on $1,000 of unemployment taxes that an employer pays, you'd have about $25 that would be going into workforce training, and the federal government would be getting a little bit less money. Is that what you're saying?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Stith, I think that's accurate, except that remember, it's not money going to the federal government, it's money going into the UI trust fund. So that's essentially it. We want money to go to workers and to businesses.
And Madam Chairman, your proposal is that the employer's taxes remain the same.
Madam Chair, Representative Stith, they would, there might be down the road some consequence to that. We think they'll stay the same, but recognize right now we're at historically low, and even for a number of 40% of our businesses out there, they're at 0%.
Madam Chair. So what I would suggest that you do is put the draft bill together with an explanation. Provide copies.
That's the plan.
Provide copies of that, Representative Larson and to Senator Kinsky prior to our February meetings or December meetings, so they can kind of work through the fine details and come back and kind of rework it from our side, so that when you're here, we'll be able to get it done lickety split. Does that make sense?
All right. Thank you, committee. Department, thank you. It is so good to see you this morning. With that, we are moving on to our 9:30 agenda item, pension plans. We'll give an opportunity for the room to clear. We will welcome up first Mr. Fuller from LSO. For purposes of clarity to members of the public in this committee, I follow the agenda pretty directly unless there's a reason to deviate, meaning that we'll hear from LSO first, ask questions of LSO, then we'll go to the agency, ask questions of the LSO, public comment, circle back for any relevant questions of the committee as we work any pending potential bill drafts. So that's how procedurally, I think it is easier to work through that way. And with that, we will welcome Mr. Fuller to discuss LSO Bill Draft 161, Law Enforcement Retirement Contributions. Mr. Fuller, good to see you this morning.
Yep, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, Brian Fuller, LSO. 24 LSO 161 0.5. This is 18-01 in the meeting materials. In July, the committee heard from the Wyoming retirement system about various pension plans of the state and their funded ratios. The three bills that are before you today on this topic were identified as pension plans whose funded ratios were not trending in a positive direction. And so at the committee's direction, three bills were prepared to increase contributions for the three plans in the bills, the law enforcement plan, the warden patrol plan, and the judiciary plan. Bill Draft 161 increases the employee and employer contribution for the law enforcement retirement plan under the Wyoming Retirement Act. The direction from the committee was for a 5% total increase that was split evenly between the employer and the employee. And that's what that is what is in this draft. So page 2, lines 4 and 5, after June 30, 2024, so starting with July of next year, each officer would be required to pay 11.1% as an employee contribution. This is up 2.5% from the 8.6 that's in current law. Then page 2, lines 18 and 19 make the same change for the employer contribution. The staff comment on page 3, there was a question regarding the percentage that may be necessary for the plan to reach 100% funded ratio in 30 years. Would need to be the percentage to achieve that would need to be, and I think this may have changed between the bill draft and when the retirement system submitted their materials, 11.71% employee and 11.71% employer. And then the committee also had questions in July about retirement eligibility, timing, and benefits. So those provisions beginning on page 3, line 27 are provided to the committee just as reference. No changes have been made to that language, and the bill would be effective July 1, 2024.
Mr. Fuller, thank you. Questions for Mr. Fuller before we go to the Wyoming retirement system? Questions only for Mr. Fuller. All right, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Fuller. With that, we'll go to Director Swindell. Welcome, Director.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm David Swindell, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Retirement System. I'm joined at the table here by Paul Wood from Gabriel Roeder Smith. GRS is our actuary out of the offices in Denver. And in the back of the room, I have Ben Brandis, our General Counsel, Rachel Meeker, our Deputy Director, and Paul has Thomas Lyle from his office as his backup. So we're here to answer questions. We've met with the committee on this plan before, and the bill draft that has been presented to you is responsive to that discussion. I did provide a memo that should be in your package for folks that may be listening at home. Just by way of a little bit of background, Madam Chairman, the Wyoming retirement system is pretty typical amongst U.S. pension systems, having special programs for public safety personnel. We're a little complicated because we have two plans that affect law enforcement personnel in the state. And we're going to talk about both of them today. That's actually not unusual. There are some systems that are a little simpler, but there's a lot of systems that are more complicated. So don't worry too much about that. If you go back to the formation of the law enforcement pension plan, it was actually a considerable legislative lift back in 2002 with a lot of work preceding it to consolidate various law enforcement pension plans in the state. We had some people in a separate tier of benefits and contributions in the public employee plan. We had the warden and patrol plan, and then the 6 first-class cities in the states had their own pension plans, and all that got consolidated into one cohesive system back in 2002. And Byron Odekoven, who is in the audience, was part of that. I've reread the history. What we're dealing with today is far simpler, and it just is to actuarially keep up with changes in assumptions. So, Madam Chairman, I can go through the memo just real quickly and highlight a few things if you'd like, just to make sure everybody's on kind of what we're talking about. But
Please, Director.
well, in general, the basic situation is when the plan was formed in 2002, the assumed rate of return for most pension systems, including Wyoming, was 8%. And since that time, the capital markets have been less kind, and over the years, the retirement system has had to reduce the assumed rate of return. And what that means is in the basic equation that Paul always counsels us on, that contributions plus investment earnings have to equal benefits plus administrative expense. That means if future investment earnings are going to be less, the contributions have to be more, or benefits got to be cut. There's been a series of pension reforms. You're well aware of what we did in the public employee plan, for example, with 2 tiers of benefits. But there's not 2 tiers of benefits in the law enforcement plan, nor have rates been adjusted. The existing contribution rate has been in effect since plan inception more than 20 years ago. And that's our basic issues, that the plan's reasonably well funded today. It's going to start to drop off if we don't. So again, this is the law enforcement plan. This plan covers state of Wyoming correctional officers and dispatchers, but the bulk of the population is local employer, deputy sheriffs, city police officers, and their dispatchers. So the state of Wyoming has 571 employees in this plan out of a population of 2,500. So that's about 22% of the force. So this plan, and it's important for everyone to understand, this plan is mostly local. So the decisions we make are going to affect local government more than really state government. This plan has 1,607 retirees. The average annual benefit's about $27,000 a year. The basic plan provisions are typical for public safety. You can retire a little earlier than in regular pension plans, age 60, or at any age with 20 years service. Early retirement's authorized as early as age 50. It's a highest 5-year average salary, and the benefit is 2.5% of average salary for each year of service, with a limit of 75% of your salary. You're vested after 4 years. Contribution history is listed in paragraph 4. And since the plan essentially dates back to really 2002 when it was reorganized, those rates have been in effect since July of 2002 at 8.6% each, employer, employee, for a total contribution rate of 17.2. Employers, this gets a little complicated. Employers can pick up part of that employee contribution. The way this plan is structured is that is a decision of the employer, including the state of Wyoming. It's not specified in statute. It's just specified that employers can pick it up if they want to. And employers are all over the map on this. And there's a discussion in the memo about kind of what that looks like. The normal cost of this plan is 16.41%. And the administrative cost is another 50 basis points. So you're right close to 17% just in normal cost and admin expense, and your total contribution rate is 17.2. There's not a lot of room there, right? And so that's kind of the issue. This plan, just as we discussed before, doesn't have a lot of organic ability to recover from a market downturn or anything like that. You can think of it as kind of a ball in a pool, and if you push it down with a market draft, it's going to stay there 2 feet below the surface until the market blows it up. It doesn't have any real ability to gain ground on it. And that's kind of what's happened with this. The There also is a calculation that we'll talk about a good deal today called the actuarially determined contribution. And that is the rate to pay the normal cost, pay the admin costs, and then gain ground on any unfunded liability in accordance with the board's funding policy. And at this point, the board's funding policy is a little complex, but it basically says we took the unfunded liability in all the plans, including this one, as of January 1st, 2018. And we're going to pay that off over 30 years. So we're 5 years into it. So it's about a 25-year payment on that. And then any subsequent years, gains and losses over a 20-year period. So it's kind of a layered approach. That's the funding policy. And that gives rise to Paul's calculation as to what the amortization component is going to be to pay off and get to 100% in accordance with that time frame, which is basically 25 years to simplify it. And that would be 6.21%. As we discussed earlier in the July meeting, that would be nice to pay it off in 25 years, but a 5% rate increase is enough to get the fund funded within 30 years. It makes good progress towards that. And that's why the committee directed the bill draft to come out the way it did. And so the current fund funding status is in paragraph 6. We're standing at 84.27%. And again, for folks that may be watching, what that means is Paul calculates all of the liabilities that we owe. We know what we owe the retirees. We have good estimates on the near retirees, pretty good estimates on the mid-career employees, a little softer on the brand new folks, but they don't have much liability. We don't owe them much. So it really winds up being pretty tight as to what the cash flows are going to be for the life of this population. And then you discount that back to present value. And we use the assumed rate of return of the system of 6.8% as our discount rate. And so you get a present value of our liabilities. And then you compare that to your assets. And there's actually two ways to calculate the assets. There's the market value of assets, snapshot in time, just what the market is worth. But we know markets are volatile, so we usually smooth the gains and losses over 5 years and say that's your actuarial value of assets. And that's usually what we in the pension system refer to for policy guidance. So you don't get too excited about a good year in the stock market nor too depressed about a bad year in the stock market. That's that. So on an actuarial basis, we're at 84.27%. And what that means is that the money we have in the fund right now is not really quite enough to pay all of the liabilities that we see coming. And that's because really we've discounted it more, or if we've discounted it less. If you assumed 8% return from here, we'd be good. We'd still be good. But if you assume 6.8, which is pretty much what we have to do, then we haven't quite got enough money. And therefore, a contribution rate adjustment or some adjustment is necessary in the plan. That's where all this arises from. The Plan 7 is a table that has some projections. We're at 84%. If we don't do anything, the plan is going to start to drift down. And that's a concern. It was a concern 4 years ago when we brought this to the committee, and we kind of we're closer to the tipping point at some point. In 30 years, we could be as low as 57% on the median projection. But with the bill, the 84% starts to grow. It doesn't grow a great deal. In fact, in 30 years, I think the proposed bill will only get you to 95%, but you'll get to 100% shortly thereafter. And you could easily get to 100% within 30 years. It all depends upon the projections a little bit, but you're pretty close. But it costs some money. The costs are detailed in paragraph 8 and is summarized. If you put a 5% increase, that's going to result in $9,272,000 more dollars in contributions that's got to come to the retirement system. The breakout is, that's an annual number. The state of Wyoming's portion, by the way, is $2 million of that, but the counties bear almost $4 million of it. Again, this plan is mostly local. The average salary is $74,000 a year. 5% of that is $3,700 and $311 per month. There's a little table there in paragraph 8. There's some more detailed charts on the funding status and where the lines go up or down with the bill or without the bill in Appendix A, and then a really detailed cost breakout near as we can by county and cities and state agencies as to what a 5% increase would entail. We made an assumption there that employers would continue to subsidize the plan or not subsidize the employee contribution in accordance with past practice. If they were picking it all up, we said they'd continue to do that. If they were picking up 2/3 of it, we said they'll continue to pick up 2/3 of this new increase. What they really will do with this is anybody's guess. But we thought that table would be helpful to show to counties and cities so that everyone would know what the impact was on not only the state budget, but the town of Athens.
Madam Chair.
Chairman Nicholas.
Did you look at modification of any of the benefits?
Could you repeat that?
Did you look at modification or reduction of any particular benefits in the plan versus just?
Madam Chairman, Chairman Nicholas, yes, we did. As you may recall, in the meeting in July, we went through various scenarios that Paul had modeled for us about decreasing the multiplier, about changing the years of service required, and so on. The conclusion that we briefed the committee on, but I think it's helpful that everybody know we did walk that. We did examine that because again, it's part of this equation I mentioned earlier.
I recall that from the last.
The trouble with benefit changes is that they take a long time to take effect because it typically affects just new hires so it doesn't really affect your liabilities in any material way for 10 years and really semi-material for, more material for 20 years. And this problem that we have now is really a legacy problem of the current population. And so benefit reductions just don't get you there. The plan will continue to decline if it doesn't get more money into it just to pay off the legacy liabilities before the benefit reductions really.
So Madam Co-Chair, I mean, all you got to do is answer the question yes or no or something, so we don't carry on. But then my next question is, did you get any?
Nicholas, I recall those meeting materials.
I do too.
Going through the graphs in our last meeting.
But I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. We did analyze that, and the conclusion, at least at that meeting, is that it wasn't terribly helpful.
So my next question to follow up on that is, since that point in time, after we asked for this bill to be drafted, have you received any feedback from the law enforcement folks who are part of this, with any comments on their preferences or any other options that they wanted us to consider or you to consider?
Of course, Director Swindell, I think those folks are in the room. I look forward to hearing from them. We have.
Madam, I'd like him to answer the question.
Director Swindell, if you can answer the question in 3 words or less, that would satisfy the committee.
Representative Nicholas, Chairman Nicholas, Madam Chairman, we have received some input. I've talked with the president of the Sheriff's Association. I'm due to present to them in Casper. They're well aware of the bill. The feedback I got from chiefs of police and the assembled crews when I've talked to them is they're very concerned about recruiting and retention. This bill, the retirement benefit, is a big part of their push, and they don't really see that any benefit reductions would be helpful to them. They would prefer to pay a higher rate.
Representative Larson.
For me, does EE represent employee and ER mean employer?
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, yes. EE is the employee cost, ER is the employer cost.
Got it. Thank you.
We probably should have clarified that in the material a little bit, but that's the language there.
Additional questions for the Wyoming retirement system? Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm asking for some fast math here, potentially, and hearing the difference between this 5% placeholder for potential increases and what is actually needed at that, I heard 6.2%. What would that translate into a dollar amount that maybe the state of Wyoming could consider contributing to get the plan to 100% quicker and putting less of that burden on our workforce? Thank you.
Director, if you know. Mr.
Do have that. I'm gonna ask our actuary to give an estimate on that. We have some numbers, but I don't have them right here.
Madam Chair, Representative Sherwood. So roughly speaking, a lump sum of about $31 million for this plan would roughly equal a 1% increase in the contribution over the next 30 years. And so if you're looking at 1.25.
Closer to the mic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Computers.
That's my cheat sheet. No, so roughly $31 million would be about a 1% over 30 years. So, a quarter of that is, maybe we're talking about $40 million-ish to bridge that gap between the 5% and the 6.12 or 6.2. Just very rough numbers.
So what you're suggesting, the number you just gave us is go from 5% to the 6.2%, right? To make an actuarially sound within 25 years.
Mr. Lyle, is that?
Would, Paul would, but yes, that's correct. That would move the funding up. That 5% is pretty much the minimum amount to get you 100% funded within 30 years. The board's policy is a little bit more aggressive than that. And so it'd be about a 25-year funding with the higher rate.
Thank you.
And could you please restate your name?
Paul Wood.
My apologies. Thank you. Further questions for Wyoming Retirement System? Seeing none, I'll invite sheriffs and chiefs forward at this time. Good morning. If you could introduce yourself to the committee and please provide any comments you might have.
Madam Chair, thank you. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. And throughout the summer, this topic of the retirement fund has been one of the top three concerns of law enforcement leaders across the state. The conversations that I've had with the chiefs and sheriffs have all, I guess would say grudgingly support the 5% increase as written in the existing draft bill before you today. And there's no opposition to the language as it's written in the bill today.
Is there a question? Questions for sheriffs and chiefs? Seeing no questions for sheriffs and chiefs. I see the world's greatest county commissioner here, Commissioner Gunnar Malm from Laramie County. Any comments from Commissioner Malm? All right. Any additional public comment?
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. Ed Wagner, I'm Weston County Chairman of the Board of Commissioners up there. This is a real tough one for me. I'm in favor of supporting our law enforcement retirement. Where it comes to us is our local dollars, where we're going to come up with the money to fund this. Presently, we do most of the funding for our retirees. Our expenses, our uncontrolled expenses are outrunning our revenue increases. That's my big concern is how we're going to be able to fund this on a local level. I'd stand for questions if you have any. I don't want to take up any more of your time than needed to be.
And does your county do full retirement contribution, or does the employer contribute or employee contribute?
Madam Chair, we do majority of it. There's a small percentage of it comes out of our employees' wages on our sheriffs. But the majority of it is by the county.
And the retirement system provided us that data, I think, in the memo, correct, Director?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, for Weston County, they're picking up about, the employer's picking up about 82.5% of the total contribution, and the employees are about 17.5%.
Thank you. Thank you both. Questions for Weston County? Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Co-Chair, thank you. So, I mean, we absolutely understand your predicament. And we being the state of Wyoming and the legislature, we have gone through this on multiple occasions on the big plan. I think we've raised contributions to that about 4 times now over the past 10 years because of the same type of problems. The fact is that we don't really have a choice, nor do you, if we want to have this solvent and protect it for the folks to come. So good luck on how you as a county decide how much you can pick up and how much you will pass on to your officers. It's a tough issue. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any final questions for Weston County? All right, seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Mr. Odekoven?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Byron Odekoven, the retired Executive Director for the Sheriffs and Chiefs, and now doing a little private consulting, and here today representing some of the retired officers who are impacted by this discussion of the viability of the plan. I want to provide a little background and understanding to the establishment of the consolidated law enforcement plan and some of the consideration, concessions, and processes that went into the creation of the plan, which brings us to the discussion today. So historically, Enrolled Act 31 of the House of Representatives 55th legislature, 1999, created an oversight committee and appropriation to study the creation of a single law enforcement retirement system. Members of the oversight committee appointed by the governor included Chairman Don Pearson from the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission, Mike Burnett from the Division of Criminal Investigation, Greg Gillum, the Chief from Green River Police Department, Leonard Heisel, the UNA County Commissioner, Byron Odekoven, the Campbell County Sheriff, Mike Reed, the Captain Rollins Police Department, Tracy Swanson from the Wyoming Retirement Board. State allocated funds and to study over the course of the year and make recommendations to the legislature of about 30%. WAM, Waco, the Sheriffs and Chiefs, peace officers all contributed funds to create to that consolidated plan recommendation. We brought together groups representing all of the different aspects of everybody that basically had badges and guns to the discussion. So in the group that was the most diverse, if you will, were the Class A cities, the civil service cities of Cheyenne, Casper, Rock Springs, Sheridan, and Rollins, who had already established their own independent retirement systems with independent benefits, contribution, liabilities, assets, and expenditures. So the melding of the plan came with actuarial assistance to negotiate each term and each position within the plan. So for example, we started at the top of the page, minimum years of service, and worked our way down, whether that involved the cost of living, percentage of contribution, rate of return, COLA, number of years for vesting. For example, number of years of vesting was one of the interesting ones. Civil service cities, 10 years. Current system, 4. Current plan, 4. As an example. COLA for civil service cities, 0. COLA for the law enforcement, 3%. Settled on 2 as a compromise position. Each of those positions, whether it was off-duty disability, on-duty disability, duty-related, or survivor benefit, was a negotiated point to the consolidation group with the actuary providing the dollar cost. So the actuary would say, okay, if you're going to go from 20 years or 10 years vesting to 4 years vesting, it costs this. If you're going to do a COLA of 2% versus 3%, it's cheaper to do 2% than it would be to do the 3%. Therefore, the cost is this. If you're high 5 versus high 3, the cost is this. Cheaper to do high 5 than it was to do high 3. We were high 3. So there was lots of compromise with actuarial assistance to get to the dollar amount that passed the legislature. The legislature in the previous year prior to 2002, for example, when it appeared, the bill appeared before the judiciary, passed with a recommendation of 15-0. It had some pretty good legislative support, ran out of support on the last day of the Senate. Unfortunately, that year and came back in 2002. So House Enrolled Act 62 from the 2002 session is where we created the joint law enforcement system that we know today. As basically, as the director has mentioned, has remained unchanged to today. An interesting section that I wanted to quote from during the bill, or as part of the bill, is on page 14 of the Enrolled Act, section 5. It's the intention of the legislature, because of the benefits of law enforcement pension account are mandated by state law, that the state of Wyoming fund the unfunded actuarial liability of the account. Granted, in context of the bill, that meant of the creation of the system, but they then recognized that the unfunded liability should be amortized over 20 years and the contribution of $5 million per biennium toward that. And in actual, the legislature in forethought paid that off early. 4 years later, they paid off the entire amount, paid it off early to help with the actuarial value and liability associated with the plan. So that kind of brings us to today, but I wanted to share that background that we did not enter into the law enforcement plan lightly. It came as a result of negotiation among a number of entities, a number of interests, and a trade-off associated directly with dollars and cost and benefit analysis in that trade to derive that plan. A couple of the comments that were made: retention, recruitment, very difficult to hire, as an example, the discussion at that time, to hire an officer from Rock Springs to Gillette or vice versa. Different retirement, different vesting, different amounts. Can you take your money? Will it transfer into the plan? Where are we with all of those things? That consolidated plan lend itself well to having that portability back and forth. Because you're a peace officer in Wyoming, you're a peace officer, your benefit then transports with you when you change agencies, departments, job duties, and distinction. So it's important for us to maintain that portability, that continuity, that consistency with the retirement plan. Having said that, today, with a system that's headed the wrong direction, again, that recruitment and retention is somewhat troubling. It's hard to put on your job posting announcement that, yes, we have a retirement, it's not viable, it probably won't be fixed for 30 years, but we're working on it. It's not exactly a good line to put on the retirement portion of your recruitment and advertising. I appreciate and applaud the efforts, the retirement and the legislature in terms of looking at an increase to make the fund whole, recognizing that in the actuaries' terms, we aren't quite there in terms of dollar amount. We aren't quite there in terms of years. I mean, it's difficult to discuss a plan that we're looking at being somewhat viable in 30 years term. If you remember earlier this year, we had a discussion, our first discussion, when there were several options discussed, talked about that very issue of, was it better to put a little cash in to have a little less of an increase and a burden to the locals? At that time, I believe the discussion was around 32 million as a cash input from the legislature and a 3% increase to the retirement contribution rate by locals. I would suggest that that may be the better approach, to have that cash infusion, so that in part that discussion was, if I remember, slightly different today than I remember it being. I thought it was a 5-year viability with that cash infusion versus 30. It sounds like that may be an incorrect memory, if you will, or a projection that's now had a little more clarity to be a little more accurate in terms of what is necessary. But I would suggest, for the long-term health of the plan, that it would be better to have that viability sooner rather than later, especially given the market, the volatility of the market, the rate of return, the demographic that can change within the plan and the system, to have that cash contribution, 30-ish million, a little less of a rate increase. We're looking at a 5% all at once or a 6% all at once. A 3% would be a lot more palatable, I presume, for cities and counties in terms of budgeting process, recognizing that going forward, there will need to be increases, but that cash contribution of the 30 million range and a 3% increase, I think in the near term would be a much more viable alternative than a straight 5% across the board. Madam Chair.
Madam
Mr.
Chairman,
Otokoven, thank you. Representative Stith?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Otokoven, did you say that law enforcement retirees currently get a 2% cost of living adjustment each year, or did I misunderstand that?
Mr. Otokoven?
Madam Chair, the plan calls for 2%. We've never had the cost of living increase because we never reached that benchmark, the initial benchmark. The state hadn't contributed their funds yet. They hadn't completed their 5%. So we've never received the cost of living 2%. The 2% has never come to fruition.
Follow up?
Madam Chairman, so you're saying right now it's 0% for cost, as it is for state employees. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Co-Chairman Nicholas?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I'm not sure, what I'm curious about is the history of the plan, and I really do appreciate the history. But have the contributions changed by either, to match the, I think you said it was 8.4% roughly was the rate of return that was really back in 2002 was the target, suggested target on it. Have the plans and or have the contributions or benefits increased or decreased from 2002 until now?
Mr. Otokoven, the questions are directed at you right now, which is why you're providing public comment. Mr. Otokoven, if you know.
I do, Madam Chair, and the answer is there has been no change from the inception of the plan in either contribution, disbursement, benefits in any manner.
And so follow up, Madam Co-Chair. So the number we just heard today is 31 million equals 1%. So a contribution of 30 million would take the 5% up to 6%. What you just suggested is 3%. That's going to take 64 million to go up to 5%. Is that your understanding of?
Mr. Otokoven, if you know.
Madam Chair, based on the testimony I heard earlier and running the numbers in my head, I think you're correct. Your calculation is correct. If you want to stay at the 5% as the benchmark target for the discussion purposes today.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Otokoven? Thank you, Mr. Otokoven.
Thank you, Madam.
Final public comment on this bill? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Mr. Richards?
Chairman Nethercott, I just wanted to note that this legislation does not include an appropriation depending on your preferences, either one time or in the event that you desire to have the state pick up matching funds for state employees. That's university and state covered employees. We have those rough numbers and we can, depending on where you land, include those.
In the event that motion is entertained, we will look forward to hearing that information. Committee, public comment is closed. The bill is back to you. Is there a motion on the bill? Moved by Representative Walters, seconded by Representative Henderson. Discussion on the bill.
Madam
Representative
Chairman,
Stitt.
so what is so if we vote yes on this, what is the cost to the state for these law enforcement officers who are covered by these, who are state employees?
Everyone needs to come closer to your mics.
Madam Chairman, I believe I have that figure for you. Are you wanting it calculated at the 5%?
No one knows.
That's what's in the bill. So yeah, the answer is yes.
Based upon what is in the bill, the cost to the state on an annual basis would be 2 million. And then biennialized, that would be 4.1 for the state only.
Follow-up questions from the committee?
Just to follow up on that. So Don, what we would need to do is add that component to the bill. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. We were uncertain of where you might land, whether or not you would have a cash infusion for the entire, whether you go to the 6.2%. So Erin, has provided a baseline of that. Keep in mind, and if I could clarify, Karen, the bill as written is 50% paid for by the employer, 50% by the employee. So I think the total biennial cost is 2.1.
That was my understanding. So Madam Chair, I would make a motion to amend the bill to add the appropriation with the split 50-50 between the employer and the employee. So it would be roughly on the state portion, which would add an appropriation of roughly 2.1 million in biennial.
Moved by Representative Nicholas, seconded by Representative Walters. Further discussion on the motion?
Question on the question.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Does that number include the university community colleges and others, or is that strictly state employees, not the ancillary state employees? Mr. Richards or Ms. Vaughn?
Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, the university is in the plan. Their portion of it is 0.625%, whereas the other state agencies are 21.78 with rounding. It doesn't make a considerable difference, but just to give you an idea, on a biennial amount, the change for state versus state and university actually increases it by $58,000. So we would still be at 2.1 million, give or take 50,000.
So,
Rounding, we're still pretty close, is my point.
so all in the 2.1 will cover it. That's what I'm led to believe. Thank you,
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Further questions from the committee on the motion? Committee, are you ready for question on the motion on Co-Chairman Nicholas's amendment? Mr. Richards, Mr. Fuller?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the existing practice, despite the language in the law, but the existing practice is that the state picks up 100% of the employee and the employer share. So as written, it was 50-50, but the existing statute provides that the employer picks up the employee share. So the numbers provided to you by Karen is needs to be doubled to the $4.2 million.
Could you refer us to that language? Because that
Wyoming statute 93412.
Yep. So Madam Chairman, Chairman Nicholas, the first language I'll point you to in the bill, page 2, lines 12 and 13. Subsection A of 93432, this is the employee contribution. And then describes that, any contribution required under this subsection shall be paid by the employer from the source of funds. And then these payments by the employer are subject to 93412C. And so that goes back to the big plan, the public employee plan language on what is covered.
So, Madam Co-Chair, my question is. So
Closer to the mic, closer to the mic.
my question is, if we want to amend that particular provision, what do we need to do? In other words, if we want to change it for this particular plan and make it so it's not all employer.
Yep. Then Mr. Chairman, I think, and I'll work with Mr. Richards on the proper place to put this. I would assume it would be right here in the subsection A that would specify that X percent, the percentage increase here shall be paid by the employee from the employee salary. And I'll use similar language that we use in other retirement statutes.
And Madam Co-Chair, I want the language to be that, the employer may pay it, like some of them do, particularly on the city and law enforcement folks. In other words, if they choose to do it, they can pay all of it. But we want to modify it so that the state itself isn't mandatorily paying all of it. Does that make sense?
Yep. So Madam Chairman, Chairman Nicholas, then I understand your direction. Then would be state employees would have to pick up the the increase percent or state employers may, or do you want the employers can't pick up?
My preference is that all employers may pay all of it, but aren't only required to pay half of it. Otherwise, the employee pays their percent as well. Does that make sense?
No.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Stiff.
Madam Chairman, so I guess I just want to get a clarification from Don about what the current status quo is. I didn't think that the state was picking up 100% of it right now, but rather some smaller portion of it. As I read 9-3-412 C Romanet 3, it looks like the state is not paying 100% of it right now. And I don't think we wanted to change the status quo on that split share for state employee members. I didn't think.
I guess for clarity.
I'm just
from
confused
Mr.
about what the
Richards,
percentage is.
Following up on that, Representative Stiff, what I'm confused about is what the statute says versus the status quo. Is there a difference between what the statute says versus what the state is actually doing?
Madam Chairman, I would refer you to the handout from the Wyoming Retirement System on the last page, Appendix B. You can see the status quo is 100% payment by the employer. I don't believe that there is a prohibition that the state cannot pick up the employee's share in statute currently, and there are those prohibitions in other plans. For example, the big plan, the state is prohibited, or the employer is prohibited from paying the employee's share of some portion of that, 3.8 or 4%, something like that.
Madam Chairman, I might be able to help.
Director?
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, the law enforcement plan is presently structured that there's a rate for the employer, there's a rate for the employee, and the law says the employer can subsidize or pick up part or all of the employer contribution. And that's all it says. So the law presently leaves it to every individual employer, to Natrona County, to the city of Sheridan, and to the state of Wyoming as an employer. This is an executive branch decision. Presently, as you can see in Appendix B, the employers are all over the map, but the state of Wyoming is one of those employers that picks 100% of the employee contribution up. So your correctional officers, which are the biggest part of this plan, they're not seeing anything out of their paycheck. It is just part of their total compensation package. It will be, as drafted, the bill would continue that same policy, and it would revert back to the executive branch as to whether we wanted to continue to pick up this increase. The environment's now changed. The employee contribution has been increased by 2.5%. What, if anything, does the employer want to do with that? And the state of Wyoming has to make that same decision, just as Natrona County does, or the city of Sheridan. And so that's the situation. It is different than some of the other plans that we'll be discussing today, where that employer pickup for state employees is specified in statute or so on. But for this plan, that's the situation.
Thank you,
Chair.
Director. Senator Kinsky?
So my question, I don't know who to address it to, is if the statute gives us the option to not pick it up, and you said there's a policy determination that we will pick up the employee share. Is that in statute? Is that in our annual budget? Is that something the governor's determined? Where is that policy determination made?
It's in statute. Is that correct, Mr. Richards? Mr. Fuller?
Mr. Chair, or Madam Chairman, is what I conclude is that it was included in their standard budget and has been incorporated in the budgets over the last 2 decades. That choice has been made. It could be changed, but that's the way I would describe the current status of 100% payment.
Follow-up, Senator or Representative Stiff?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Swindell, perhaps you could maybe when we meet in December, clarify this, because if the law enforcement members who are also state employees are considered to be state employee members of the fund, 9-3-412C Romanet 3 appears to require that the employees pay some piece of it. So, but maybe, I mean, that's just what the plain language says, but maybe there's some exception to that in some other statute that I'm unaware of. But if you don't mind, maybe at a future meeting, running that to ground,
Yeah,
that would be
let's
appreciated.
Hold that thought. Let's circle back to why we're here to this discussion so we don't get lost. Co-Chairman Nicholas, could you restate your motion and the reason for it?
Yeah, from what I understand, I think the original motion is correct. We moved the bill, and the amendment, I don't think is necessary, because as the bill is crafted, it's 50-50, employer, employee. If the state, through the budgetary process for the individuals in those particular agencies, chooses to pay 100% of that, then that we could just put that into their respective budgets. So I think the bill as stands so I would withdraw my motion.
All right.
And just stand on the bill as it's currently drafted.
The motion is withdrawn. Representative Larson.
So Madam Chairman, with that conversation, I think then we come back to Mr. Richards' comments that we probably have to double the amount that we had in the original amount of 2.1 to 4.2, because they have the option of
And they
funding it
exercise
fully,
it.
correct?
Mr. Richards, thoughts on that?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I think the 50% appropriation is necessary should you wish to proceed. The second 50% is a policy decision.
So Madam Chairman, a question if I may.
Safe. Representative Larson.
So then the second 50%, were we to determine that policy decision heretofore has been made during the budget session
Mr. Richards.
or the budget bill, I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, that is correct. Okay. With a caveat that typically speaking, you would include in the first year of an operation of a program, the appropriation in the vehicle that it is, because the budget may pass before this passes, for example, and you wouldn't know how much to put within those agencies. So typically for the first year of a program, if you want 100% payment, just hypothetically, by the employer, it is best to put that appropriation in this bill. That way it can stand or fall on its merits.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Further discussion on the bill? Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would move to include 2.1 million in this bill, which will cover the statutory requirement of 50% of this increase, because this bill is automatically increasing the state's share that's statutorily required. And that's the 2.1.
Moved by Representative Walters. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Larson. Discussion on the 2.1 million appropriation. Representative Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Is that $2 million, is this an annual or is it a biannual number?
It's biennial number, I believe Mr. Richards said. Further discussion? I see furrowed brows. Let's give a moment. All right. Question on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion has passed. Further discussion on the bill? Question on the bill, roll call.
Members of the committee, the motion is on 24 LSO 0161, working draft 0.5 as amended. Representative Henderson. Representative Larson. Representative Sherwood.
Aye.
Representative Stiff.
Aye.
Representative Walters.
Aye.
Representative Swanitzer Dave.
Aye.
Senator Anderson. Senator Guru. Aye. Senator Kinski. Aye. Senator Salazar. Aye. Co-Chairman Nicholas. Chairman Nethercott.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, the motion is adopted. Based on your prior comment, I'll withhold assignment to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. With that, we will move to LSO 162, Patrol, Warden, and Investigator Retirement Contributions. Mr. Fuller.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, 24 LSO 162 draft 0.518-02 in the online meeting materials. This is the bill draft that the committee requested in July and would increase employee contributions under the State Highway Patrol, Game and Fish Warden, and Criminal Investigatory Retirement Act. Page 2, starting with lines 1 through 5, that is striking obsolete language that concerned prior years. And then on page 2, lines 6 and 8 through 8 would increase the contribution for employees of this plan from 14.56% of the salary to 18.92% of the salary. The remaining language that is stricken applies to previous fiscal years, ranging from 2013 to 2017. The staff comment just notes that this was the percentage LSO calculated. I believe, that percentage may have changed in the retirement systems memo, but this was the calculation we came up with to put the plan at 100% funded in 30 years. And then for reference on page 3, beginning with line 13, this is language concerning the employer paid share of the employee contribution for this plan. And if the committee wishes for the employee to be responsible for that 4.36% increase, then an amendment would be needed to this language. The bill would be effective July 1, 2024. With that, I would stand for questions.
Mr. Fuller, thank you. Questions for Mr. Fuller?
And Madam Chairman, my apologies. Similar to Mr. Richards' comment on 161, if the committee moves forward with this bill, there would need to be an appropriation as well.
Thank you. Do we know those numbers, Ms. Vaughn?
Madam Chairwoman, at 4.36%, the general fund appropriation annual will be 131,000 or 262,000 biennialized.
262,000 biennial?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Any questions for LSO at this time? All right, seeing none.
Madam,
Ms. Vaughn?
I overheard there was a concern about it being low. And the reason for that is because there are only 3 employers in this plan, and 2 of which use commission funds in order to pay their benefits. So we're only looking at the general fund for one of the employers.
Game and Fish pays as well.
Correct. Game and Fish does pay that out of commission funds. So does YDOT. Only the Attorney General's office would have a contribution from the general fund.
So, Madam Chair, what would the contribution requirements be for Game and Fish and YDOT? So we just have those numbers.
The total contribution across.
So that the public can follow along. The question is, how much would it cost in the event we had to appropriate dollars for all of the state employees funded under this plan?
With the exclusion of federal funds, the total biennial appropriation would be 2.3 million. That is general fund and what we consider other funds.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Final questions? All right, seeing none, we will go to the Wyoming Retirement System, Director Swindell.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the other law enforcement plan that the Wyoming Retirement System administers. This plan was not consolidated back in the history of the previous plan. And this is a small plan that is just for the sworn officers in the Highway Patrol, sworn Game and Fish Wardens, and investigators in the Attorney General's office as a Division of Criminal Investigations. There's a memo in your packet that describes the population. There's 272 current employees. The retiree population, we have 378 pensioners in this system. The average annual benefit is $33,000 a year. Basic plan provisions are somewhat similar to the law enforcement plan, but not quite identical. The normal retirement here is age 50 with 6 years of service. There's no 20 years of service at any age like it is in the previous plan we discussed. There is no provision for early retirement earlier than age 50. The highest average salary is a 3-year average. The benefit is 2.5% of highest average salary for each year of service, not to exceed 75%. So that's similar. And the vesting is 6 years of service. This plan does have a history of some changes in the contribution rates over time. You can see the table in paragraph 4. The current contribution rate is 29.44% of salary. It is an expensive plan. This is 100% state employees. So unlike the previous discussion, it's just state employees. The current situation is that of that 29.44% total contribution, there's an employer share of 14.88 and an employee share of 14.56. So that gets the total. And of that employee share, some of it is subsidized by the state. And this is at least somewhat indicated in state statute. The employee paid by the employer is 11.92 because the statute says 2.64% must come out of the employee's paycheck. And that is in 9-3604 Boleg C, Bolegs II. So that's the way this plan operates. That 2.64% is specified in statute. And what happens to the rest of it is, I guess, a decision and kind of an unknown what happens. If nothing else changes and it's not budgeted, then if you increase the employee contribution, then it would go to the employee. The normal cost in this plan is fairly high, but it does have a unfunded liability. It's not huge. It's $48 million in the unfunded liability in this plan. So it does have an amortization component to try to pick that up. The 4.36% increase is envisioned in this bill is sufficient to get the plan to 100% funded within 30 years. And it actually is the exact amount of the increase necessary to match the actuarially determined contribution. So it should get there actually a little sooner than that. And because it is the ADC rate is just a little more aggressive. The plan funding status, we have assets of 176 million, but the liabilities are 219 million. And so there is an unfunded amount of 42 million and change, rounds to 43. The funding ratio, and again, that gets back to the same discussion as what a funding ratio is, but in this plan, we're 80% funded and the assumed rate of return is the same as the previous 6.8. And again, what has happened is we keep ratcheting down the 6.8 and it kind of gives rise to, well, you thought you had enough money, but now you don't. Madam Chairman, I might pause for just a moment and give a little brief commentary on the 6.8 and where we think it might go from here, because it might be informative for all these bills. Nationally, Wyoming was very typical in the day 20 years ago, assuming 8% return, and systems were achieving that. Since that time, capital market expectations have declined, and the average across the United States amongst the 128 pension plans tracked by my national association is right at 7.01. We're just a little less than that at 6.8. There are some systems at 6.5, but everybody has brought down their assumed rates of return. And in every system, that means your liabilities are not discounted as much. Therefore, they are larger. And therefore, you suddenly have an unfunded liability. It's not really sudden. This has been growing over some time. Where's it going to go from here? Is this going to keep going on? When does the pain stop? Well, no one knows, and I certainly don't know, but I suspect we're near the end. This is the result of mostly lower interest rates after the great financial crisis in 2008. And no one predicted that rates would go as low as they did, as long as they did. What happened is, of course, traditional savers were punished by this. And in many ways, pension funds are somewhat traditional savers in that for reasons of liquidity and stability, they always had a large fixed income component in their investment portfolios. And those fixed income portfolios for a time benefited from lower rates, looked good when you were having a bond that had a large coupon rate. But it lasted so long that everybody eventually hit the end of their maturities and their fixed income portfolio just wasn't generating much interest. And so it became kind of a tailwind that everything else had to pick up for. But capital markets expectations from here are actually pretty bright, despite last year's difficulty in the stock market when rates rose so suddenly, which caused bond prices to fall and caused people to discount stocks as well. There was no safe harbor. The fund lost 6.99% last year in 2022. But having suffered that pain from here, where do we go? At the recent conference, Callan and Associates, one of the big investment advisors, opined to our group that they, for the first time in the last 15 years, their capital market expectations actually match what pension funds were doing. We have caught up, in other words. So I suspect that for the most part, Callan's largely right, that further reductions in the assumed rate of return from 6.8 are unlikely. Might go a little lower, but you're not going to take another 120 basis points off of this. And so I don't think you're going to see big adjustments to the liabilities the way we've seen over the last 15 years. There's also been some other things that have been impacted on those liabilities. The assumed rate of return is the largest component of that, but of course, mortality is part of that. And this is a strange industry I work in. Living longer is a problem. It extends out our liabilities, and we have adjusted all the mortality tables. We have incorporated generational mortality. We assume that each generational is going to live longer. That increases your liabilities, but that's been done. I don't think, and Paul, I might invite your professional commentary on this. I don't think we're going to see more large changes in mortality absent some huge scientific breakthrough that is more science fiction than reality. Paul, what do you think?
Mr. Wood.
Madam Chair, I would agree. I actually just pulled up that 2002 law enforcement report and was reading it. And the table that was used back then was called the 1994 group annuity mortality table based on experience from the 70s. So we've changed so much since that point. And what we've tried to do is try to future-proof that assumption so that we don't get into this situation 5 or 10 years down the road where we need to say, oh, we got to add a ton of liability because we were understating liability for a long time. And so by using these techniques of generational mortality, using these updated tables specific to the public sector, we've taken a lot of that risk off. And in fact, something that we found as an industry in the actuarial profession is that life expectancy really isn't increasing quite at the rate that we thought it was going to. So there might be some tailwinds for us on mortality here over the next 5 or 10 years, depending on how post-COVID plays out and other things that are happening across our country in terms of the health and healthiness of folks living around here. So in terms of the discount rates and those rate of return assumptions, 6.8, it's certainly an incredibly reasonable rate. And with the interest rates being up, that's going to be an easier bogey to make anyway. So I don't foresee myself making a recommendation in any term unless something changes dramatically, but in any next 5 years or so to move that rate down. We're at a position where we need to allow time to work. We need to allow our plans to be funded. We need to make the right decisions today and then let the plan work out over the next 5 or 10 years.
Mr. Wood, thank you. Thank you for that perspective. Questions for the director or Mr. Wood, the actuarial? Representative Stiff.
Madam Chairman, Director Swindell. So 2.64% is what the criminal investigators pay into their own retirement right now. is there some reason when we increase it that we shouldn't divvy it up 50-50 so that the employees pay? Because 2.64% is, less than what the regular state employees are paying.
Director, if you know, and I do see that representative from the AG's office is here, who is the employer of those criminal investigators. Deputy Director Shellhouse? No, that's been anybody. They're gone now. Sorry, I thought they were here behind us. My mistake. Director, if you know the answer to that question.
Madam Chairman, Representative Stith, it's a policy decision. From the retirement board perspective, we're kind of agnostic to whether the money comes from the employer or the employer, other than, we're also an employee in the public employee system. But anyway, no, the board's agnostic on that. It's a policy decision. I think it relates to total compensation, recruiting, and retention, and it's the purview of the employer.
Madam Chairman, just for comparison, Director Swindell, I'm sure you know this, I don't. What for a regular state employee, say the Assistant Attorney General, for example, who's working with a criminal investigator, how much does that regular state employee, how much of their salary do they contribute to the retirement?
Director, if you know.
The in the public employee plan, the state picks up a 5.57% component of the employee contribution, which is 9.25%. And that delta is, can somebody do the math for me? I've got it written in my briefcase. It's
3.68. Representative Stith,
3.68. That's correct.
do you have an understanding of that now?
Yeah. So the public employees, the administrative staff in the AG's office, they're seeing 3.68% out of their paycheck for their employee plan. And it's 2.64 for the sworn officers in the Division of Criminal Investigation. Different plans, though.
Thank
Different
you.
benefits.
Further questions for the director? Seeing none, we'll go to public comment. Mr. Oderkoven or Mr. Allen, do either of you want to touch on, I think Representative Stith's, concern over the disparity between the contribution for state law enforcement officers versus regular public employees? Either of you were tracking that?
Madam Chair, Alan Thompson with the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. And the conversations that we've had, across the state with our members is that, the statutory split has been 50-50 across, the public employee plan and, this one, but the employer through their budgeting process, through their policy, has taken on a greater burden in certain places. And that's the decision that rests locally or with the state. So we haven't had any specific input on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only thing I would add additional to that is that consistency of option, if you will, which is somewhat of an oxymoron, is good. And that it is the local control, the local discussion, so that also in recruitment and retention, in terms of folks who pick up that 100%, that's part of their compensation, their advertisement, their plan and attraction to coming to work for them. So likewise, if you're looking to move from one agency to another, that is also part of your decision-making matrix for whether or not it's cost benefit for you to move from one agency to another in terms of what comes out of your pocket. So I think it is best to leave the statute where it is, which that is that it's half to the employer, half the employee. The employer may, at whatever their choice is, pick up that percentage on behalf of the employee to satisfy their needs locally. While you may want to wrestle with putting that burden on or specifying that out, I would offer that it creates additional layers and burdens
locally unanticipated consequences, I think outweigh the discussion of adding that additional percentage to the employer on behalf of the employee.
All right, thank you. Additional public comment? All right. A member of the retirement plan. Welcome, Trooper. If you could introduce yourself to the committee.
Madam Chair, Committee, Josh Walter, Lieutenant Colonel for the Wyoming Highway Patrol. We certainly are not against having a solvent plan. That just makes sense to us. The concern is, Representative Stiff's question is, we currently pay 2.64% in statute. It's required we pay that, but the employer may require that we pay more. It's up to the employer. So our concern is we just received a raise. We were one of the lowest paid state agent or lowest paid law enforcement agencies in the state. We fell behind. And this raise got us up a little closer and more competitive. And what we don't want to do is historically has happened with our increases in contributions is that it falls on the employee. Simply because most of the employees received a single digit raise, and any increase to that will hit that pretty hard. The governor's talking about phase 3 of the state raise increase. So obviously he, and I'm sure most of you recognize that we're not where we need to be yet. So any hit to that, even small, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3% is huge to us. So that's the unknown here. I get the wanting to have a solvent plan. I think we're incredibly well funded right now at 84%. That's pretty solid. I get the proposed increase over 30 years. We'll probably get there sooner with the proposed increase, and that's all positive and that's fantastic. But just the timing of this is really poor right now in our view. So I would just ask that the consideration for not having the employee contribute to the additional amount be considered.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. Questions for the Lieutenant Colonel? Seeing none.
Respond to, because my recollection is over the past 2 or 3 years, we've given specifically pay raises to the State Highway Patrol over and above the pay raises that were given in the governor's recommendation. So Don, could you just give us a synopsis over the past 3 or 4 years of what pay raises we've given to the Highway Patrol? If you have.
Madam Chair, Representative Nicholas, I do not have any specific, aside from the statewide average for the last 2 years.
And what they received, I mean, I just remember sitting here and particularly giving them additional pay raises. So maybe I thought we did. But
That might have been over a lunch break.
that could be.
Representative Stiff.
Kevin Maynard.
All right, any additional questions for the Lieutenant Colonel? Lieutenant Colonel, how long have you been with the patrol?
Madam Chair, a little over 20 years.
And in the last 5 years, how many raises have you received?
2 that I'm aware of. The 2 most recent ones. Raises before that, Madam Chair, were typically counteracted with increases to contribution to healthcare. So we'd receive a small pay for performance raise, and then it seemed like shortly after it was taken away with the increased contributions.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. All right, Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick follow-up to that. Just wanted to check in on morale and how your team is feeling right now.
Madam Chair, Representative Sherwood, we're hoping it doesn't snow. But it will. We're 50 down. We're supposed to have 208 officers and we have 158. So the pay raises have seemed to help, and we've turned the corner in terms of recruiting and folks applying to the agency, but it just takes time. It'll take time to get them in there, and through attrition and you know, just over time, we're still going to lose folks, obviously, but you know, it'll take probably 3 or 4 years at the rate we're going to get close to full. So we're down 50. Some troops around the state are down to 1. Pinedale has 1 trooper. So we're having to move folks around the state and cover, but surprisingly, morale in terms of wanting to move forward, want to see the agency succeed and wanting to do good things is good. But folks are just really, really dreading a winter. I mean, it's hard. A lot of overtime. People don't want to do the overtime. They want to spend time with families right now because they've done so much. But all things considered, we're in a pretty good place.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. We appreciate your service. Representative Stiff.
Madam Chairman, Lieutenant Colonel. So statewide, we gave an 8% increase a year ago and then another 8% increase, so a little over 16% when you add it all together. Is it your understanding then that when it came to YDOT, that those raises didn't go to the highway patrol, but maybe went to other YDOT employees? Is that what happened?
No.
I can't answer the question. I just know ballpark what was received by state troopers and other folks that work for the highway patrol, and it varied. It was all over the board depending on where they were in terms of MPP, what percentage MPP they were at, and then of course there's a pay for performance component in there as well. So I can't give you specifics.
Mr. Hibbert.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The implementation of the salary increases was across the board implemented the same way, in the same fashion. The general fund of those was provided, and then there's a clause inside of the both instances that said that the special revenue agencies could follow in line with those decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Hibbert. Appreciate that information. Okay, with that, is there any further public comment? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed. Committee, back to you. Moved by Representative Walters, seconded by Co-Chairman Nicholas. Discussion on the bill.
Madam Chairman,
Representative Walters.
please. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have two amendments. I'll start with the first, and the first would be to include $132,000 in this bill.
Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion has passed.
One
For-
more.
Mr. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So my next motion is I would like to bring in 93604C Romanet 2 and increase the statutory current amount of 2.64 to 3.03. And all this does is that if I get a second, I'll explain.
Second.
Please
Okay.
proceed, Representative.
Thank you. And seconded now. Thank you, Madam Chair. The purpose of this is this will just maintain the status quo in terms of how much the employee and employer are statutorily required to pay. It doesn't change what they can go up to, but because we're increasing the overall amount, if we don't increase this percentage, it will ultimately put more burden on the employer automatically or employee automatically. And so this is just conforming to keep it status quo as of how things operate today based on the new change.
Thank you, Representative. Those numbers again, 2.64 to 3.3.
3.03.
Madam Chairman,
Representative Stiff.
just question for Representative Walters, why it's 3.03. I thought it might be 3.68, which would make it the same as for others, public employees.
Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm using my numbers strictly from the Wyoming Retirement Systems handout on page number 4 of the Patrol and Warden document that they provided to us. And that's where I garnered these numbers for this change in 93604 subsection C Romanet 2 or two little i's together. My math may be off, but that's where I did the math from, is just reading.
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Fuller.
this language is in the bill. If members want to look at it, it's on page 4, it'd be lines 7 and 8. If the committee members wanted a reference to the section that Representative Walters is referring to.
Page and line numbers are helpful in these motions. Thank you for the reminder, Mr. Fuller. Representative Larson.
So just further discussion on this amendment to question to Representative Walters. So historically or recent history, we've been paying 91.03% of that retirement, and this maintains that. Is that correct?
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's my understanding, that it would keep it right in that ballpark. Not sure how many decimal points we're going back here, but I think that keeps it right there. Yes.
Director, come to you.
Madam Chairman, we concur. There's a proportion right now that 2.64 of the existing rate, and the change in the amendment would keep that same proportion.
Thank you, Director.
Madam
It's a
Chairman.
proportional change. Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A question for Mr. Fuller. The way I read the bill, page 3 and 4 were informational and not part of the bill. That's why I didn't include a page number. And that's why I bring this as more of a conceptual motion, because it is currently not in the draft bill based on my reading.
Mr. Fuller?
Yep, Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, that's correct. Would be included in the bill if adopted.
Follow up.
Is it necessary?
I do have a follow-up.
All right,
Additional.
Representative?
So then if we do that, do you want to have conforming cleanup, because some of those previous lines talk about other years that are unnecessary?
Yep, Madam Chairman, I can certainly make those changes as well.
This feels really good. All right, further discussion on the motion? Representative Zwanitzer?
Madam Chairman, I'm afraid I might be going over the sideboards just a little bit. But Director Swindell, if we happen to add 40 or 50 more members to this plan and say the next 5 years, do we need to be doing anything with this bill or with the amendments that are being proposed? And also looking at the interest rate that I would like to think is going to go up. So maybe your 6.8 figure will go up. If you would just hypothetically give me a thought on that.
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Swanser, one of the issues in this plan, it's not as big as the assumed rate of return, but has been the vacancy rate and the decline in population, which is effectively contributing to the plan. If you look at the history of this plan, it's been very stable for years. It's had 305 members, 307 members, 302 members. Suddenly, boom, you're down to 272. That's a 30-person drop, 10% of the population. And that did affect the projections a little bit. Your question, though, was, what if it goes in the opposite direction? You gain 30 people and we go from, I guess I might want to clarify the question. You're talking about restoring the existing population or increasing the previous, we're going to 300 again, like it has been, or we're going to 330?
Representative Zwanitzer, is your question in response to Lieutenant Colonel Walters' comment about being 50 troopers down, but they anticipate being able to achieve additional employment capacity within the patrol and therefore adding 30 more state employees to the plan?
Madam Chairman and Director, yes, on this point, if in the next 5 years, you're able to put another 40 or 50 members onto this plan, do we need to do anything at all with the amendment or the plan?
Director?
Madam Chairman or Representative Swanser, I think we'd have to analyze that. It would be helpful, but my reaction is 4.36%. No, it doesn't make that much difference. It would just be helpful, and the result of that would be is that there would be a little bit of a tailwind to the projections, and you might get to 100% even sooner than these projections say. But it's not going to be enough to avoid a rate increase.
Question on the motion.
Mr. Fuller?
Yep, Madam Chairman, with this motion, I think there would need to be a change in the appropriation as well. And I don't have that exact amount, but if the employee is now picking up part of this increase, that would need to change.
Madam Chair.
Representative Walters?
I did double check that, and I think we'd have with the previous motion that passed, there should be an adequate amount to cover what would be included in this bill. So with anything, we'd have a reversion, I believe.
That's Representative Walters. Further discussion on the motion, yes.
To follow on with Representative Walters, I would just say that in the prior bill, you did a biennial appropriation, and this bill, that is a one-year appropriation.
That's right. My understanding, Ms. Vaughn, you told us it'd be 262,000 for a biennial. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so Representative Walters, did you want to do a biennial appropriation or an annual appropriation?
I was intending a biennial. I did not catch that had only done that in half. That's my mistake, but we can go back to that motion later. As I think we're in the middle of adding this new language percentage.
So we were going to move on the bill, right? Or no, we're on the question on the previous motion on the
Right.
percentage.
100%.
So thank you, Representative Walters. So further discussion on Representative Walters' motion on changing the percentage from the 2.9 to the 3.03, that proportional change for the employee contribution. Further discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
That motion has passed. Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to amend, I'll just move to change that 132,000 to the biennial number of 262.
Second
Moved and seconded.
question.
Does everyone understand? Senator Grew is nodding his head affirmatively. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Beautiful. Further discussion on the bill.
Madam Co-Chair,
By Chairman Nicholas.
just a comment, and if you look at the participants, it's primarily Highway Patrol, and then the next largest is Game and Fish. If you look at the Game and Fish is all independently funded, and so we don't need an appropriation towards that. And we do know that Game and Fish has surpluses in their revenues, so that they will be able to capture, if they choose to pay for the increases directly, I think fairly easily under their budget. With regards to why not, I think that we may want to add additional dollars to that, but we don't need to do it in this bill. But I would ask Kevin if there's a position on that when this comes in front of us, so that it's not a substantial impact to the current pay raises we have and how that all bleeds in. And I'd appreciate your comments when we get to that during the markup.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Hibbert.
we'll see to it that it gets cleaned up.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Further discussion on the bill. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just, I think to pick up on what Representative Swanitzer was asking for, if we could get information on the number of open positions in Highway Patrol, Game and Fish, Attorney General, just to understand how the number of employees in the plan may grow, or sort of the number of positions that we're missing that aren't contributing to the plan. Thank you.
Mr. Hibbert.
Madam Chair, I know that Department of Administration and Information is putting together your vacancy report now as we speak. That is on its way as a normal process, and it'll be updated when the session comes as well. So that expectation is being met.
All right. Further discussion on the motion on the bill. Mr. Richards.
Chairman Nethercott, typically we would also include appropriations of federal funds. It's a small amount. It is entirely within the AG. Some of their officers are federally funded. That amount would be $41,000 to be consistent with Representative Walters' prior motion. And then to the comments on other funds, there are a range of other funds, both within the Attorney General's office, Department of Transportation, which are traditionally appropriated. You don't have to, they could be 11, but to do it thoroughly, we would appropriate those funds. And we often use the terminology, a like amount of other funds or in proportion to.
Mr. Hibbert.
Madam Chair, that works fine. And what will happen is the bill will drive a column inside of I-bars that will facilitate that. And then it'll become part of the base and live in the standard.
Thank you, Mr. Hibbert. Co-Chairman Nicholas made a motion.
Don, you want to just recharacterize my motion? So everyone knows what it is.
Mr. Richards, could you please make the motion?
Madam Chairman, it's my understanding that Representative Nicholas desires to appropriate $41,000 of federal funds and a proportional amount required by this bill in other funds to the appropriate agencies.
That's it.
And that was seconded by Representative Walters. Discussion on that motion? Anyone got to challenge Mr. Richards? $50. Challenge Mr. Richards, $50. Seeing no one willing to do that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion has passed. Further discussion on the bill before Co-Chairman Nicholas wants to do a roll call. Further discussion? Last chance for agency questions? All right, seeing none, roll call.
Members of the committee, the motion is on 24 LSO 0162, working draft 0.5 as amended. Representative Henderson, Representative Larson, Representative Sherwood,
Aye.
Representative Stiff,
Aye.
Representative Walters, Representative Zwan or Dave,
Aye.
Senator Anderson,
Excused.
Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Kinsky,
Aye.
Senator Salazar, Co-Chairman Nicholas, Chairman Nethercott.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, the motion is agreed to.
Does anyone need a break? Seeing a couple head nods. Okay, committee, I'm serious. We're going to leave at noon at lunchtime. 5-minute break, not 10, 5. So we'll come back at 11:01. All right, members of Joint Appropriations Committee, we're coming back from our break at 11:03, a couple minutes later. We will start with LSO 163, Judicial Retirement Program Contributions. Mr. Fuller.
Yep, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, this is draft 0.518-03 in the online meeting materials. This is a draft the committee requested in July to increase the employee contribution required for employees under the Wyoming Judicial Retirement Act. So in the bill, page 2, line 2, amends the percentage of the employee contribution from 9.22% to 11.47%. The staff comment on page 2 notes that the 2.25% increase is what LSO calculated is necessary for this retirement plan to become 100% funded within 30 years. And then on page 3, line 4 is the language concerning the employer pickup of the employee contribution. Under current law, and I'm looking at page 3, lines 6 through 9, the employer can pick up 5.57% of the employee contribution, identical to other state employees. And then 3.65% of that employee contribution must be paid from the employee salary. With that, and then again, Madam Chairman, similar to the other two bills, depending on the will of the committee, this would need an appropriation if going forward. This is entirely general fund funds that would be implicated, so there wouldn't be any split as in the last bill. With that, Madam Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Questions for Mr. Fuller? All right, seeing none, Mr. Fuller, thank you. Director Swindell.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, this is the judicial plan. This is another separate plan, and it differs a little bit from the other plans because it is also directed towards a population that has a different employment pattern. This one is a little different. You don't get to be a judge at age 18 or a judge at age 22. Typically, the age entry is in the 50s, and the retirement plan is structured for that. In the memo, you can see the plan population. All these are state of Wyoming employees. These are judges in the Supreme Court and the Circuit Court. There are 55 current members. We have 35 pensioners, and the average annual benefit is $67,000, $67,420 per year currently. The population, this is a little different with the plan provisions. Normal retirement is age 70 with continuous service since appointment, or age 65 with 4 more years since appointment, or age 60 with 20 or more years service. Early retirement's authorized as early as age 55. The highest average salary is the highest 3-year average, and the benefit is a little complex. It's the highest average salary times the following: 4% for each of the first 5 years of service, 3% for each year from and including the 6th year of service through the 15th year of service, 2% year thereafter from the 16th year through the 20th year, and 1% for each year thereafter, vested is 4 years. So it's a more complex benefit formula. It's laid out in paragraph 3. Contribution rate is 23.72% of total salary. It is divided between the employer at 14.5 and the employee at 9.22. The employer picks up 5.57%, same as in the public employee plan. And the employee that is actually paid by the employee is, as Mr. Fuller mentioned, 3.65%. The normal cost for this plan, this is a little different than some other plans. This plan does not have a large unfunded liability. Its situation is a little different. We're 99% funded. The unfunded liability is $372,000. That's a small number that this committee doesn't normally deal with. That's not the real issue. The real issue with this plan is that its contribution rate is actually a little less than normal cost. And therefore, it's not an unfunded liability problem. It simply is the present rate doesn't cover the full cost of the plan, and therefore it's going to drift down if we don't make a rate adjustment. The projections on the plan are, as the current plan's 99% funded. But if we don't make any changes, the plan's going to drift down very slowly. At 30 years, you'll be at about, well, it rounds to 92%. That's still pretty good. But it's never going to grow. It's going to tend to have drift down. It doesn't have any ability to suffer a market loss because it has no organic propulsion to raise it. In fact, it has a little bit of declining because it doesn't even cover its full normal cost. So the bill would raise the contribution rate by 2.25%, which is the amount that the actuaries recommend according to the actuarially determined contribution. We'll get into that discussion a little more this afternoon, but that is the amount. It will start to restore the plan. This plan could be 100% funded within 15 years if the bill passes.
Questions for the director? All right, seeing none. Ms. Butler?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Elisa Butler. I'm the State Court Administrator for the Wyoming Judicial Branch. Just in response to the bill, obviously, our judges are not keen on increasing their contribution, and that is true. We just received a pay raise for those judges during the last session. That pay raise has yet to go into effect for most of the judges. The circuit court judges received their pay raise in April. The Supreme Court and District Court judges will not receive a pay raise until there is a retirement in those two conferences, either in the Supreme Court conference or the District Court conference. That's constitutional. So it is not likely that they will see a pay increase until March, I believe, of this year or next year. I'm sorry. I guess the first thing we would like to say is whether or not this is strictly needed at this time. And I understand that it is slightly underfunded, but not substantially. If it is necessary, then I think what we would propose is that 2.25 be borne by the employer in some way. So I think, from what I have seen, there are two methods to get that done. One would be to shift that 2.25% to the employer statutorily. So that would be a change to 93705 rather than 93704. So that would increase the statutory contribution by 2.25% of the employer. The other option would be to shift that cost to the employer. And again, I think this would require some additional statutory change. Ideally, we would like to keep the judges at a contribution of 3.65%. So that would require that 2.25% to be picked up by the employer. But again, I think that may require another statutory change. I'm looking at Mr. Fuller because he knows more than I do. But those would be probably the two recommendations that we would have is if this increase is strictly necessary, that those costs be borne by the employer rather than the judges themselves.
Representative.
So Ms. Butler, if I understood you correctly, you said they would probably not be recognizing the benefits pay increase till March.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson, that's correct. The district court judges and the Supreme Court justices.
And this bill doesn't take effect until July, right?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson, that's correct.
Further discussion? Yeah, follow up, sorry.
Yeah, so reconcile that concern for me.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson, I don't think it's the concern that the pay raise isn't going to go into effect. It's simply the fact that they received a pay raise and now we're shaving a couple of percentage points off of the pay raise that they just received. So additionally, I think the bill went into effect in April of this year. So that 9 months or year that the justices and judges didn't receive that pay raise because of the Constitution, that would further decreases their salary dollars.
Madam Chair,
Senator Kinski.
Ms. Butler, or perhaps staff can refresh my recollection. We voted recently for a pay increase 10 to $15,000 per judgeship, and a session ago before that or two, didn't we also have another increase that was $10 to $15,000 per judgeship?
Ms. Butler?
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Kinsky, the 2023 pay raise, there was a 7% increase for district judges and Supreme Court justices. So I believe for the district court judges, that was about $11,000. For the Supreme Court justices, 12-ish, something like that. I do believe there was a pay increase a few years before that. I cannot tell you off the top of my head exactly when that occurred, but there was also a raise then. What I can tell you is that based on national data, the current salary for Supreme Court justices, which again doesn't account for that increase that they'll recognize in March, they are 42nd in the United States for pay. Our district court judges are 38th with the current salary structure. So we are not high in nationwide, even with the pay that they're receiving today.
Representative Larson?
There are other places. If we put this requirement on the employer, could the employer handle that without any adjustment to their budget?
Ms. Butler?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Larson, they could not.
Further discussion? Questions for Ms. Butler? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Butler. Further public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Committee, back to you. Moved by Co-Chairman Nicholas, seconded by Representative Walters. Discussion on the bill.
Madam Chair.
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question that will be followed by a motion, and that is for LSO. What is the amount we need to include in this bill so that we can fund for the biennium?
Madam Chairman and Representative Walters, the total we're looking at on a biennialized number is $420,000. Of that, you would then determine how much would be borne by the employer versus the employee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to include $420,000 in this bill.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion on Representative Walters' motion. Question having been called. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? That motion has passed.
Madam Chair.
Representative Walters?
Similar to the previous bill, I would move, and it's not part of the bill, but we're going to bring it in. But I will reference a page number in the bill that is here for reference purposes only, but it will make it easier for everyone.
I think it would be helpful for the public following along.
I believe it's page 3,
Thank you.
line 11.
Wonderful.
My reading of the document from our good friends at WRS is correct. That 3.65 should be increased to 4.00, if I read that correctly. And that will, and if I get a second, I'll explain.
It's been seconded by your good co-chairman who seconds before you complete your motion each time, Representative Walters. Would anyone like to challenge Representative Walters' math? Representative Larson wants to.
Madam Chairman, I'm just questioning as I read Mr. Swindell's document. It says that it's current 5.5% and should be amended to 7.47. So, oh, I get it. 3.654. I am defeated in my challenge.
Further challenges to Representative Walters' math? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That motion has passed. Mr. Fuller?
Madam Chairman, I think to avoid a gap in percentage, I think Representative Larson's change to change the I'll let Mr. Richards correct me if I'm wrong, but that 5.57 should change to 7.47. And that's the sentence before the sentence the committee just amended.
Representative Larson, you good with that? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, roll call.
Members of the committee, the motion is on 24 LSO 0163, working draft 0.5 as amended. Representative Henderson. Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Sherwood.
No.
Representative Stith.
Aye.
Representative Walters.
Aye.
Representative Swan and Sardana.
Nope.
Senator Anderson.
Excused.
Senator Guru. Senator Kinsky. Senator Salazar. Co-Chairman Nicholas. Chairman Nethercott.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, the motion is adopted.
All right, committee, we are going to our 10:30 a.m. agenda item, pension plans draft legislation continued, which we've completed. Celebration. 1:30 pension plans actuarially determined contributions, ADC. Do we want to move to that? It's 11:20. Mr. Richards, do you feel prepared to move forward? My review of that also looks like that could have started at 10:30. That's how I'm interpreting the agenda. Representative Larson?
Madam Chairman, just on those pension bills, just appreciate the work from the retirement system and helping us with those numbers.
Thank you. Appreciate all that work. All right, committee, are you prepared to see where we are on our agenda? And for members of the public, we are actually starting our 1:30 agenda item. We will break soon and won't complete that to make sure we don't get too far afield of the agenda for the day and members of the public that are following along. But we will go ahead and get that started, recognizing that winter storm is coming in. And there are members of this committee that do need to drive home. So with that, Mr. Richards, if you are prepared.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, I just have a brief overview for this topic and we'll turn it over to the department and the actuary. At your July meeting, the Joint Appropriations Committee discussed the status of the big plan, that is the pension plan that takes into account the majority of state employees, municipal and county employees, as well as school district employees, which in fact comprise about 48% of the total. You then tasked the State Budget Department, LSO, the Wyoming Retirement System, and their actuaries, GRS, to look back and see the implications of imposing an actuarially determined contribution plan as opposed to a fixed rate plan. I believe that motion or direction was initiated by Representative Walters at the time. We did meet on 2 different occasions in person and then worked independently as well. And some of the takeaways from that, as the GRS team and WRS team will share with you, is it turns out that it is potentially not as volatile as is anticipated during your July meeting. Secondly, the Wyoming system, as indicated by Chairman Nicholas earlier in today's meeting, is really not a hard fixed rate system. And by that, I mean the legislature has modified its rates on a regular basis over the past 2 decades, which really changes some of the observation from a fixed rate versus an actuarially determined contribution system. Next, Mr. Fuller with the Legislative Service Office, per your direction, has prepared a 1-pager. I believe that is attachment 22-04. And this is not a bill draft, but it outlines a number of policy choices that staff would need to have answers to in order to move forward with a bill draft if it is the committee's pleasure. And then finally, as requested by the committee, the retirement system, along with their actuaries, have not only provided estimates at the state level, but have drilled down and looked at the impact on other employers. With that, Madam Chairman, I'd either stand for questions or just turn it over to the department.
Mr. Richards, thank you. Questions for Mr. Richards? Comments right now as we move into this topic? Seeing none. Director?
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, this is an interesting concept. I think when it was first brought up in our July meeting that there might be a method to administratively adjust rates rather than having it as a fixed rate system adjusted by the legislature. There was actually a little bit of excitement from the actuaries.
Whoa, whoa. Mr. Wood, is that true?
And that is because
100%
such a
true.
concept is a recommended best practice. 72% of state pension funds nationwide incorporate some sort of actuarially determined contribution analysis into their policies. That is not to say that the remaining states that are fixed rate systems like Wyoming are deficient. But it is true that in pension world, as in many things in life, it is easier to keep up than to catch up. And a administrative mechanism that kicks in tends to be more responsive to markets and changes in mortality rates and so on than legislative action, which is by its nature sticky. And that is not to say that this body has not been attentive to these things over the years. And that some systems are fixed rate and are very successful. South Dakota, our neighbor, is such a system. They're a fixed rate system. However, they've had more of a better history of actually moving their rates to the actuarially determined contribution level, more so than we have in recent years. So that was the concept we were asked to present. It is something that is can be incorporated, but there's a lot of decisions to be made, and they are kind of outlined in Mr. Fuller's memo to you. You have to decide, okay, where are we? Well, let me describe that first. In the public employee plan, it is our largest plan. It has about a $2.5 billion unfunded liability. We have 10 billion in assets. We really ought to have 12.5. And that is largely because of the changes to the assumed rate of return, which we've discussed previously. Same effect, it's just bigger because the plan's bigger and all the numbers get pretty big. Right now, the total contribution rate is 18.62% of salary. That is enough to fund the plan, but its position is kind of mediocre. It's 77% funded. That's a little better than the national average at 73 or 74, but it's not great. But it is projected to grow. It's going in the right direction with the present contribution rate, but it's going to be slow. It's not going to hit 100% within 30 years. It's going to be about 92%. So its speed is slow. The actuarially determined contribution rate, which Paul's team is required by accounting standards to do, takes into account the board's funding policy, which I discussed earlier. And the board's funding policy is a little more aggressive than 30 years or 35 years. They would try to get this fund funded within 25 years. That difference in contribution rate is calculated at 1.99%. In other words, the contribution rate in the public employee plan, if you're going to hit the funding target and stay on the plan and have a funding rate that's in concert with the plan, has to be 1.99% more, call it 2%. If you adopted a program to move rates administratively according to the ADC, then there is upward pressure on the rates. The mechanism is going to try to start kicking in rate increases to increase the rate by about 2% versus the status quo. And there's financial implications of that. Therefore, there's policy choices about guardrails. How fast could the mechanism choose? It could be, you could put on some very tight guardrails, 50 basis points every 2 years. And it would take you 8 years to cover a 2% gap and so on. and we can discuss that. The idea, though, of a mechanism can be fit into the state's biannual budget process. We calculate this every January, every year. Actually, we don't calculate in January. We use the data as of 1 January. We do the calculations, and those numbers are usually available in April of any given year. So the process would probably look like for us that in an odd numbered year, like we are now, 2023, we would have had these numbers available to everybody by April or late April. And that could be incorporated into people's budget projections and goes into the budget process. And that would result in appropriate changes in the standard budget in February of the following year during the budget session, and to take effect in the following year. So we would have about an 18-month notice before the rates, if they were to change, took place. So the idea would be you'd change rates about every other year along with the budget. There'd be no change in the following year, and then you repeat the process. And we've got some schedules for that. So that's kind of what the concept is. We have a presentation that is fairly lengthy, and I'm not sure we'll get through all of it before the lunch break, because I think you want to go on a noon break. But by my watch, we're at 11:30, so I think we can get pretty well into this if you'd like to do that.
Yes, I think it's good timing. So go ahead and.
So
start
we'll
that.
go ahead and go to, I'm going to introduce Paul Wood, and he's going to take you through the situation and where we could be. This is all possibilities.
Mr. Wood.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to be going off of this presentation. I believe it was included in your packet. And I will certainly try to keep things moving because there's a lot in here, but there's a few points that I just really want to drive home and make sure that we're all on the same page. So I'm going to start with slide number 2. Again, as Dave mentioned, the current reality is we have $2.8 billion across all of our plans in unfunded accrued liability right now. And so one way or the other, we have to pay that off. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to determine or come up with a plan to pay off that $2.8 billion. So right now, we always refer to this as a fixed rate plan, but as you know, it's been brought up many times, and I'm going to show you in a moment, there's some hidden volatility in a fixed rate plan. So even though our contributions don't adjust up and down automatically every single year, we still have had to have rate increases occur 7 of the last 12 years, I believe. And that's on slide 3. I show you those numbers. We go back to 2012 when in the public employee plan, the total rate was 14.12. And since that time, we've had increases in 14, 15, and 16, and then 19, 20, 21, and 22. And so even though we refer to this as a fixed rate plan, it's been nothing but fixed. And so it's really has said to us that, you as the legislators have to sort of take control of the wheel here and say, when do we want a rate increase based upon recommendations that you receive from us as the actuary, from Dave and his staff as part of WRS. Slide 4 just covers the information that I want to talk a little bit about today. So what makes up a funding policy? When we talk about funding policy, what exactly does that mean? Talk a little bit about the differences between actuarially determined funding and the current funding type that you are on right now, which is that quasi fixed rate funding. And then finally, what can an ADC policy or actuarially determined policy look like for WRS? Slide 5. I believe I've had this slide in this room before. This is like my favorite slide. And I'll just go back to what Dave said earlier. When we left the meeting here last, I believe it was beginning of July, I was downright giddy because I get to talk about this stuff again. And this is my passion and this is what I love to do. So just this really quick funding equation, again, C plus I equals B plus C, contributions plus investment earnings over time have to equal benefit payments plus expenses. And so to the extent that the one side of the equation with B plus E, that's pretty much fixed. We have a pretty good handle on projecting out those benefit payments. And so you can think of that side of the equation. We are in a defined benefit plan. The benefits are defined. We do a very good job of modeling those benefits. That side's fixed. With your plan right now, absent legislative action, the C portion is fixed. So that's not moving. So then what does that mean? That means the balancing item is the investment return. And so we're effectively relying on the capital markets to either come through for us and not need us to make any changes, or if we do have poor experience in those investment returns, then we have to somehow take control of that wheel again and get back to changing contributions. And so if you understand this equation, you'll understand how pensions are funded. In any given year, this equation is not going to balance. We know that money in doesn't always equal money out, but over the long term, it has to equal, or you're going to effectively run out of money at some point. Slide 6, just really quickly, I like to break down the funding policy when we talk about funding policy into 5 different pieces. The first couple of pieces I'm not going to spend much time on, but the first is the actuarial assumption. So this is like our discount rate, how long are folks going to live, when are they going to retire, so on and so forth. The comment I will make here is that the board is very diligent about reviewing these assumptions on a very regular basis every 4 to 5 years. And so we take a look at these assumptions and see if any tweaks need to be made to them. And so, as I mentioned earlier in the committee meeting here, I'm very comfortable with the current discount rate of 6.8%, and also the mortality assumption and how we've sort of future-proofed the mortality assumption to some extent. The second component of a funding policy is the actuarial cost method. This is the actuarial sausage making, if you will. This is how we allocate what has been accrued up to date, or I guess we allocate the entire present value of benefits between 2 pieces, what's been accrued to date and what's going to be accrued in the future. And you're on the absolute most common actuarial cost method used in the public sector. It's in fact the best one, in my opinion, that's out there. And so no concerns in that regard. The third component is asset smoothing. We've talked about this. I think Dave even mentioned it earlier about that difference between the actuarial value and the market value of assets. Basically, we calculate this actuarial value of assets to smooth out a lot of this volatility so that we don't have major swings in our market or in our contribution rates and our funded status each and every year going forward. And this would be because this is going to be one of the main mechanisms to cut down on volatility of that rate from year to year. Most common approach right now is a 5-year smoothing method, which is what you are on. I've got clients that are on 3 years and clients that are on 10 years, but 5 years seems to do a really nice job of filtering out that volatility. The last 2 pieces, the amortization procedure, we are going to spend a little bit more time on that. So I'm just going to skip over that right now. And then finally, risk management process, all these 4 points above are fantastic, but if we don't have a way to manage it and to understand what the risks were, we're shifting risk from here to here, and how are we managing those risks, then it really takes away from a lot of this funding policy. So really think about what is the risk tolerance of the board and of the plan and of our legislators, and then what is the budget capacity of not only the state but our local employers. That's something that has to be considered throughout this process. Slide 7, Dave has already mentioned that the Wyoming Retirement System Board has a recommended funding policy, or a funding policy that we use every single year to calculate an actuarially determined contribution as part of the valuation. And it's this really cool process where we look at these amortization layers. So every single year, we started back in 2018, and we had about $2.3 billion in unfunded accrued liability at that time. And the board's policy was to amortize that piece, pay that off effectively over a 30-year period. And each year going forward, we have these little gains and losses, so differences between what we expected to happen versus what actually happened. And those individual layers are going to be amortized over their own 20-year period. And so when I look at this chart, the way that I look at this is like looking at the rings of a tree. You can see, what's happened to your plan the last couple of years. So 2022, we had a big experience study. 2021, we had a nice gain there, $103 million that was driven by investment returns. And so you can look at this and track it back to the actual experience. So I really enjoy looking at this chart. But what this also shows us is that if you were to stick to a plan like this, you can look at this plan and say, I know that $2.3 billion is going to be paid off in 25 years. I know the amount above that it's going to be paid off in 16 years. And so it really sets out this dedicated plan to paying down that unfunded accrued liability, as opposed to going back to everyone's favorite equation, C plus I equals B plus C, where now we're just using the investment return as our backstop, absent any changes in contributions. So slide 8, why do we even go through this process of calculating this actuarially determined contribution? Well, first of all, it's a really nice metric to use to compare the current statutory contribution to. So it gives us insight as to how well that statutory contribution is doing. And then in its most basic form, the actuarially determined contribution is made up of 3 different components. The first is what we call normal cost. And you can think of normal cost as just the ongoing cost of the benefit. If your plans were exactly 100% funded, then the normal cost would be the contribution. We've also included a little load for administrative expenses, and then finally that amortization payment. So the sum of those 3 amounts equals your actuarially determined contribution. And again, we calculate that in order to have something to compare our statutory contribution to and give us a metric as to how we're doing. Slide 9 breaks this down for the PE, the public employee plan, in terms of a percent of pay and a dollar amount. And our normal cost in the public employee plan is 11.33%. And so again, you can think of the 11.33%, that's again the ongoing cost. That's the value of the benefit that's being accrued every year. And something that is also rather interesting to think about with normal cost is it's a nice way to compare plans to other plans. So some of the plans we talked about earlier today had much higher normal cost, and then you track that back and say, well, why is that? Well, say for the judicial plan, their benefit multipliers are higher than in the PE plan. They also retire at different rates. And so you can get a sense of what is the relative value between these different plans. In the PE plan, that 11.33, that's a pretty standard normal cost amount, not too high, not too low. Administrative expenses about 0.42% of payroll per year. And then that amortization piece, if we were to use that layering approach that I mentioned earlier, 8.86% of pay. So that again, in this most recent valuation, we were about just under 2% short of that actuarially determined contribution, and that equates to about $38 million in payroll.
Well, I want to make sure that everybody is tracking here. There's a little break in the presentation here. Just remember that 170, you see the 8.86% amortization of unfunded liability as a measure of payroll, and the 171 million. That 171 million is the same number on slide 7, where you add up all the layers. So it's 171 million, and then as expressed as a percentage of planned payroll, that's 8.86%. Everybody follow that? So the other thing to understand here is that in this plan, that 8.86% is a big component of the rate. If you did not have an unfunded liability, if that number was 0 or very small, your contribution rate would be a lot less than 18.62, let alone less than the proposed 20.61 or calculated 20.61. That's how much the contribution rate is trying to catch up on the unfunded liability. So the sooner we pay it off, the sooner we can drop rates, bottom line. And that's going to be in the next part of the presentation.
Questions right now? Committee? Comments? Panic? None? All right. Thank you.
If I'm moving a little too quickly, tell me to tap the brakes. So I don't want to blow by this stuff, but I also don't want to take up a ton of your time. So
You're doing great.
okay, wonderful. So let's go ahead and move to slide 10. And this is where we're I've got some really great looking charts that are going to really show what Dave was just mentioning here. And again, this comparing and contrasting a fixed rate plan. So, again, the current fixed rate plan, you have to take legislative action to change the contributions that are coming into the plan. So that volatility is again hidden. So when you look at our projections, we're going to say it's going to stay at this particular rate, but we know that if we see adverse experience or things get really well, then there could be some adjustments to those rates. So it's not, truly fixed rate. But again, the key takeaway is there's no automatic adjustment to those rates that could occur every year. In terms of the ADC funding, that's the biggest distinction there is that plans that are funded on an ADC basis, their rate can adjust every single year depending on experience. So if you have a really good year, you could see the rate come down a little bit. If you have a really poor year, you could see the rate go up. And so that's really the key distinction between those two.
Representative Larson?
So when we're having this conversation, with the goal of getting the unfunded part of this taken care of and make the rates a little more reasonable on that. So if you have this component in there for the 1.99 in, or the 2% that you're trying to add in there. But if you have a year of high returns, do you reduce that amount, or do you keep it there to accelerate getting that done sooner? Help me understand, because you're trying to get flexibility in here. Do you ever reduce it, or is it always?
Yeah, so that's going to be a topic of discussion a little bit, but I'll give you a little bit of a preview of it. So if you had a completely unfettered ADC plan, I'll give you an example. The state of Rhode Island is one of those plans. In a good year, their rate can go down in any given year. And so we've seen that happen a couple times where the rate comes down just a little bit. And so, go ahead.
Does it do that before it's 100% funded, or do you have to
Yeah.
get 100% funded before you can have that flexibility?
So in that particular plan, it can drop before it's 100% funded. And really what that does, it sort of locks in that date that you basically choose a date, say, I want to be fully funded by 2038. And then what happens in the interim there can adjust that, but that 2038 date effectively doesn't change, but it's the contribution that'll adjust for that. Yeah.
And that would be a policy decision as part of this concept. You could say, well, if we have a good year, we're going to harvest that and get there sooner, and we're not going to take a rate reduction. But that's a policy decision.
Yep. So we'll move on to slide 12. I think this is there's always these risk and reward trade-offs, and we never see a free lunch, if you will. Maybe we will at noon, but who knows? Basically, the fixed rate funding, the reward for fixed rate funding is budget stability. So we really know what the contribution is going to be in the upcoming year and in the next few years. The risk of this fixed rate funding is funded ratio volatility. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if we keep that C part completely locked in at 18.62, we all know, and we look at our 401ks and all that, all the time, and we know how volatile the investment markets are. And so we become, much more dependent on the investment markets and the capital markets. And so that really can mean that your funded ratio outcomes in a projection could be very wide. With the ADC funding, it's the opposite situation where the reward is funded ratio stability. Again, we know that we're trying to pick that date in the future that we want to become fully funded. And we're going to do everything we can to get to that point. But the risk there is contribution volatility. So your contribution could go up or down any given year to achieve that goal. And so that's really the biggest distinction between those two. Slides 13 and 14, these are, besides C plus E equals C plus I equals B plus C, I think these are really cool because this really demonstrates that particular formula, and it shows us how it operates in real life. And so what I have here is a chart that shows, we'll move to slide, there we go, slide 13. It's the benefits as a percent of payroll. And so you can think of that blue shaded area. Those are the benefits so that's the benefit piece of our equation. The red line running down the middle there, that's our current 18.62% contribution rate. And we see it just stays stable as a percent of pay. And so all the area below that red line, that's the portion of the benefits that's going to be paid through contributions. And then everything above that line is what's going to be paid through investment earnings. And you can see that over the next 41 years, 46% of our benefit payments are going to be made through investment income. And so that's one of the reasons that we pre-fund. That's exactly why we pre-fund. We want to have investment earnings that we generate to pay these benefits and to keep contributions down. But on slide 14, if we just change that pattern of the contribution over the exact same period, When we move to this actuarially determined contribution amount and we make contributions of about 2% or so higher for the next 25, 30 years, you can see what happens there. We reach fully funded, the contribution rate drops down to 11.33. And now we're generating over 56% of our benefit payments are being made through investment earnings. So it's almost a savings of $5.3 billion over the next 41 years. So it really, I'm sure everyone here is aware, you pay me now or pay me a lot more later. And that's really what this is showing. So if you pay a little bit more upfront here, and then you can really see that benefit of that contribution rate drop. You can see that, we reach 100% funded, in 25 years instead of 41 years. And you really start to reap the benefits of pre-funding and of your ability to use your investment earnings to pay benefits. So I'm going to pause there. Any questions on these two charts here? How about 2 more slides? Yeah. Hang with me, we're almost there. So on slide 15, really just the key takeaways here, that projected funded status, it's going to be rather volatile if we don't change our contribution rate automatically. So that is nice in the sense that we have that budget stability, but the long-term outlook could change dramatically year to year. It doesn't say that fixed rate plans can't work, as Dave has mentioned, but it just it takes a strong gut to be able to handle those movements every single year. Again, we want to take into consideration the risk tolerance of our decision makers and the plan sponsors, and then ultimately the ability to make these contributions. Would it be fantastic if we could get $2.8 billion deposited tomorrow? Absolutely. Is that even feasible? Absolutely not. So we have to work with that thought that we have to have some of this, we have to live in the real world here, and we can't just fix this overnight. So it's going to take some time. So it's about developing a plan to get us there. And then finally on slide 16, I wanted to touch on 2 items. We've already talked a little bit about the assumptions and methods that go into the valuation. The stronger your funding policy is, the less pressure there is on your assumptions. So we've got the 6.8% rate of return, and let's say that we only get 6.5%. We do have this little mechanism to make up for those missed contributions. And so it takes a lot of that pressure off of that particular discount rate in that regard. And then finally, I just wanted to mention COLAs, because I know that we're in a really strange period now, of very high inflation, and I think our retirees really want a COLA at some point. With the fixed rate policy, we may get to the point where we could be 107% funded and can pay, and the board can recommend a COLA at that point. But there's a lot of uncertainty around that. If we were to move to an actuarially determined contribution amount, again, we know there's more certainty in that date that we're going to reach fully funded. Does it potentially mean more contributions to that date? Yes, it does. But it gives us a little bit more certainty as to the point at which we expect to be fully funded. And so I think that's a great place to break, if that's certainly not my call, but I can keep talking forever.
Well, I appreciate that. Any questions right now? We'll come back to this after lunch. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The question is, you can go up or down year to year, but do plans that have this ADC have the option for employees? If it goes up, they can opt to have it stay up year over year, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yep. And I will just go back to that Rhode Island example. They have a mechanism in there that if the rate drops, then the state has to budget 20% of that drop. And so let's say the rate goes down by 1% of payroll, then the actual rate that the state would pay would go down effectively 80 basis points or 0.8%. And then the other 20% will be made up through a general fund contribution. So what you can do is you can add these different safeguards in to say, we don't want the rate to drop, or we don't want it to drop more than 0.5% or 1%, something like that. There is a lot of flexibility in that, but that's one example. The state of Arizona, their plan, we just had actually a rate drop this year, a little bit of a rate drop that we're going to be seeing. And that's really special for them because half of that contribution that we calculate every single year, the employees have to pick it up. And so if it increases by 1%, then the employees have to pay 0.5%. And so they're a little more, they allow that rate to certainly drop to help their employees if we're ever in that position. But again, it comes down to this policy decision. How do we want to do this? You know, we're going to talk a little bit about that in the afternoon.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none, committee, we will break for lunch. I'm thinking of coming back at 1:15. Is that nodding your heads? Yes, those of you that may have to travel have any? Okay, we'll come back at 1:15. We're obviously breaking early too, so still get a decent lunch break. I look forward to seeing everyone back at 1:15.